Before we begin tonight's journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Every click helps us keep the fire burning and bring more stories from history's forgotten corners. And now, as the world quiets down and the stars reclaim the sky, let us begin. You wake not to the gentle kiss of morning birdsong, but to the harsh clang of chapel bells as if the sky itself were impatient. This is the world of King Aurelius Thorn, aged 47, sovereign not only over a fractured kingdom, but over the mounting aches in his joints and the ghosts of decisions past. He doesn't rise from the bed so much as escape it, a battleground of straw, damp wool, and sleepless thoughts. His knees crack, his ankles protest, and cruel draught snakes in from beneath the door, whispering secrets like a jealous courtier. There are no gentle awakenings here, only the relentless grind of duty, crowned in gold and burdened with silence. In this ancient stone chamber, every morning feels like an unwanted encore to a performance no one asked for, but no one dares to cancel. The bed is cold, the goblet of last night's wine remains untouched, and the crown, still there, waiting, watching. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? A quiet room, a midnight train, under the covers, hoping sleep will come soon? Let us know in the comments. I read each one, and your voices shape this growing tapestry of silent dreamers. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and ring the bell because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. A tale of shadows, secrets, and a kingdom that forgot how to sleep. And remember, these aren't just stories, they're echoes of who we once were, and perhaps who we still are. As the morning light slowly leaks into the chamber, casting long shadows across the cold stone floor, King Aurelius Thorn stares at the ceiling. It's not the comforting ceiling of a castle or the crown that weighs heavy on his head. No, it's the weight of history itself, pulling him further down into the depths of his thoughts. With every creak of the old beams above him, his mind churns through the centuries of rule that preceded him. Kings who died young, kings who died alone, kings who died trying to hold on to something they couldn't control. And yet, here he is, the weight of a throne on his back, in a time where no one has the luxury of forgetting for long. There are no peaceful mornings in the life of a king, just the clang of iron bells ringing out across the kingdom, signaling the start of another day and another fight. The moment his feet hit the floor, the burden of sovereignty begins to tighten around him like a noose. His chamber, though lavish, feels more like a tomb than a place of rest. The grand oak four-poster bed, with its heavy velvet drapes, once a symbol of power and luxury, now seems like a prison. Every morning, it drags him out of sleep with its relentless reminder that no matter how tired he is, the world waits for no one. The grandness of his surroundings is a constant mockery of the loneliness that reigns within him. A king might command armies, but the only army Aurelius has left is the army of regret, guilt, and unspoken fears. His knees creak as he swings his legs over the side of the bed, and a sharp twinge of pain shoots through him. At 47, he's not old by the standards of the common folk, but in the world he inhabits, where every moment feels like a battle, it might as well be a lifetime. He grits his teeth and forces himself to stand, his body protesting every movement. He was once young and strong, the image of power, a king who could conquer kingdoms and tame dragons with nothing but a glare. Now he is a man bent under the weight of not just age, but the crushing responsibility of ruling a kingdom that no longer trusts him. The silence is deafening. Even the servants have not yet arrived to attend to his needs. And so Aurelius is left alone in a cold chamber with only the echoes of his thoughts for company. He shuffles across the room toward the window, his robe dragging behind him like a forgotten fabric. Sitting silently on his dressing table, the crown watches him with that familiar, unyielding gaze. He doesn't touch it yet. He doesn't have to. Its weight presses on him whether it rests on his head or not. He looks out over the kingdom, a mist hanging over the hills like a curtain drawn over the landscape. The rooftops glisten with the early morning frost, and the town below stirs to life under his rule. Aurelius knows that for all the beauty of the world outside, it is no longer his kingdom. The people have grown disillusioned, tired of promises that were never fulfilled. They have begun to whisper of rebellion in the shadows, and though no one dares speak it aloud, Aurelius feels it in his bones. The sound of approaching footsteps pulls him from his reverie. Anselm, a young boy barely 12, is already overburdened with the weight of the palace's most minor tasks. He enters with a slight bow, his eyes cast down in the customary way of all servants. "Good morning, Your Majesty," he murmurs. His voice is high-pitched, filled with the innocence of someone who has yet to understand the true meaning of loyalty or the weight of service to a king. Aurelius grunts in reply, too tired to do much else. The boy approaches with his robe, which smells faintly of lavender and something else, a hint of dust, perhaps, or the weight of the past. As Anselm helps him into the garment, Aurelius can't help but think of his youth. He had been much like Anselm once, filled with the hope that service to the crown was noble and that giving everything for the kingdom was an honor. But that hope had withered over the years, just as the land had withered beneath his reign. The robe is too tight around his chest, as if it has grown weary. Anselm's hands tremble as he adjusts it, the boy's nervousness palpable. And yet, there is no escape. Aurelius wears this crown of responsibility and duty like a suit of armor, and the longer he wears it, the more it becomes a second skin, one he cannot shed, no matter how much he wishes to. Finally, the boy steps back, clearly relieved to be done. But it's not the boy that matters. It's the room, the silence, the overwhelming sense of being trapped inside a life that no longer feels like his own. He glances at the crown again. The gold gleams in the dim morning light like its jewels sparkling coldly, silently mocking him. He can almost hear the whispers of his ancestors, long gone but never truly silenced. They stand behind him in that place where kings become more than men. But Aurelius doesn't feel like a king today. He feels like a man on the edge of something he doesn't fully understand. He is tired, unsure of the path ahead or the kingdom he is meant to lead. "Shall I fetch the royal physician, sire?" Anselm asks, his voice soft, almost hesitant. Aurelius waves him off, his foot swollen and sore from gout. He has lived with it for years, a constant companion to his rule. But there's no time for that now. He waves the boy away, dismissing him with a gesture that feels far too familiar. The boy hurries off, no doubt eager to return to his menial duties. Aurelius doesn't blame him. He remembers when he had been young and enthusiastic, believing his service to the crown would bring honor. Now, it feels like a chain. He shuffles toward the window, dragging his robe behind him. His thoughts are as cloudy as the landscape before him. The kingdom below him is alive and breathing, but he feels as though he's already dead inside. There is no joy in ruling a kingdom that no longer believes in you, and yet he cannot give up. He cannot walk away. A king does not abandon his kingdom, no matter how broken it may be. The crown may not fit, but it is his. The weight may be too heavy, but he must bear it. As he looks out over the land, he wonders, what would happen if he just let go? What if he could walk away, leave the crown behind, and live like an ordinary man? Would he be free then? Would the weight of the world finally lift from his shoulders? The question lingers in his mind as he turns away from the window. The day is waiting for him, full of demands and responsibilities. He steps back into the hall, his footfalls echoing through the empty corridors. He doesn't look back. There's no time for that. There's never time. And so the crown waits. It always does. And he puts it back on, just for one more day. The day is just beginning, but King Aurelius Thorn can already feel its weight pressing down his shoulders. The grand halls of his castle are not filled with the bustling joy of a kingdom in its prime, but are instead laden with a heavy silence that echoes off the ancient stone walls. His footsteps reverberate through the corridors, a reminder that he is still here, still the king, whether he feels like it or not. It is the 3rd hour after dawn, and the royal court is beginning to stir, though the echoes of his solitary thoughts linger in the quiet corners of the castle. A few servants shuffle past, their eyes darting away when they see him, the man who holds their fates in his hands. Aurelius knows that his presence carries a weight far greater than any crown could represent. The whispers have begun. There are rumors that his reign is faltering. The murmurs were that the kingdom was growing restless, and its king was growing old. He pulls his robe tighter around him as if to shield himself from the cold, both the literal chill that seeps through the castle's walls and the colder, more insidious chill that has been creeping into his heart for years. The crown, still sitting upon the royal table in his chambers, calls to him, but it is a call that he dreads. He is not ready to wear it again. Not yet. Not today. He feels its suffocating weight even from a distance, a constant reminder of the battle he cannot win. The weight of being king is a constant companion. Aurelius has spent years making decisions that have affected the lives of thousands, but he cannot escape the knowledge that the decisions that matter most often go unnoticed. Who honestly cares about the most minor disputes over land or the petty complaints of nobles vying for power? Who remembers the day-to-day struggles of the common folk? Who remembers the lonely hours spent in a grand hall, waiting for the next problem to arise, the next crisis to manage? His thoughts are interrupted as the heavy door to the royal chamber swings open. It is Everard, his chancellor, the ever-efficient, always-present man who never waits for an invitation, but instead arrives with scrolls. His powdered wig is slightly askew, but his posture remains perfect, a testament to his lifetime of service. "Your Majesty," Everard says, bowing with a flourish that feels more like an obligation than a sign of respect. He does not wait for permission, but begins immediately with his report, as though it were his sole purpose. There are 6 petitions from the guilds, 3 border complaints, and the bishop is waiting to see if you will approve the new chapel roof made entirely of lead. Aurelius waves a hand dismissively, his mind already drifting to other matters. The petitions, the complaints, the bishop, none of it matters. It's just more of the same. The same old political games, the same old demands. The weight of his duties has long since turned into a numb routine. He is a man burdened with responsibilities that no one else would dare take on, yet somehow he feels no closer to finding peace. "Bring me the goat one first," Aurelius says, his voice heavy with the exhaustion gnawing at him for years. Everard blinks, surprised at the request, but he nods and departs without a word. The king waits, gazing out the window, eyes scanning the kingdom he rules. The mist has begun to lift from the hills, revealing the bustling town below. There is life out there, but Aurelius feels like an outsider, watching it all unfold without being a part of it. Yes, he is the king, but that title has become more of a cage than a crown. The weight of it has driven a wedge between him and the world, a barrier that grows taller with every passing day. When Everard returns, he is followed by a man who looks slightly out of place in the royal halls, a commoner wearing rough clothes and holding a bundle wrapped in cloth. The man bows low, though there is a sure defiance in his posture, as though he knows he doesn't belong here, but doesn't care. "Your Majesty," the man says, his voice steady but tinged with nervousness, "I bring you news of a goat theft in Alderwick. It has escalated, Your Majesty." The words hang in the air, and Aurelius feels a flicker of amusement. This is what his kingdom has come to, a goat theft. In the grand scheme of things, it should mean nothing. It's just a minor dispute, a petty crime. But to the people, it is everything. They cling to these stories, these small, insignificant moments, as though they are the last threads of stability in an uncertain world. Aurelius listens, his mind drifting in and out of focus as the man recounts the events. The theft, the accusations of sorcery, the town's fear of something more sinister lurking in the shadows. The tale is as absurd as it is tragic. A goat was stolen, some villagers believing that the thief was cursed, others convinced that dark forces were at work. At its core, it is a story of fear and superstition, a story that the people want to believe in because it gives them something to hold on to in a world that is spinning out of control. "Very well," Aurelius says, finally breaking the silence. "Send a delegation to investigate. If it's just a theft, let the villagers handle it. But if something is more at play, we'll send word for reinforcements." The man nods, grateful for the king's attention, and leaves the room without a word. Aurelius sighs deeply, turning back to the window. The sky is brighter now, but it feels no less heavy. The goat theft, petty disputes, and endless petitions are all the same. They are just distractions, small fires that the king must put out so that he can survive another day. But what does it all mean? What is the point of it all? Aurelius cannot help but wonder if it's all been for nothing. The wars he's fought, the treaties he's signed, and the alliances he's made seem like empty gestures now, hollow acts of power that have accomplished little more than to prolong his reign. The thought nags at him, but he shoves it away. There is no time for such questions. The day has only just begun, and many fires remain to put out. As he moves to leave the room, his foot catches on the edge of the rug and he stumbles, catching himself at the last moment. It is small, but it reminds him of how fragile everything is. One misstep, one wrong move, and the kingdom could crash. Aurelius steadies himself and exits the room, his mind already shifting to the next problem. The crown on his head feels heavier with each step he takes, but it is his burden, and he will carry it for today. The tension in King Aurelius Thorne's chest tightens with each passing moment as he walks through the castle's cold, dimly lit hallways. The day has barely begun, but already he feels its weight, 1,000 little decisions pressing on him from every side. The murmurs of the court, the endless demands, and the cries for justice all weave together in a cacophony that threatens to drown him. For every person who needs him, a dozen more demand a piece of his soul. He pauses at the end of the hallway, staring at the massive wooden door that separates him from the council chamber. The very room represents everything he has built and lost. He breathes in deeply, trying to calm his nerves. But the truth is, he feels nothing but exhaustion. He is not the man he once was. The warrior king, the conqueror of lands, the symbol of strength and power. Now he is a weary ruler, trying desperately to hold on to a kingdom slipping through his fingers like sand. The door creaks open and he steps inside. The room falls silent, the way it always does when he enters. The murmurs of the court hush and every head turns to face him. He is no longer just a man entering a room. He is a king, a symbol. But tonight, the symbol feels hollow. Aurelius steps toward his throne, every movement weighed down by the years, the burden of leadership, and the relentless pressure of wearing a crown. As he settles into the high-backed chair, the pain in his joints flares up again. He grits his teeth, trying to ignore it. The throne is a painful reminder of his position, literal and metaphorical. It's carved from solid oak, its armrests adorned with lions that seem to judge his every move. He adjusts uncomfortably as if the throne is making him aware of every ache in his body. The council members, all lords and ladies of the realm, sit in a semicircle before him. Their faces are a mixture of anxiety and expectation. They know what they want: action, decisions, power. And yet, what can Aurelius give them? What can he do when his strength is fading, when his body rebels against him, and when the kingdom he rules feels crumbling under the weight of his rule? "Your Majesty," says Lord Eldrick, the oldest of the council, his voice trembling slightly. He's the first to break the silence. The issue of the northern border has escalated. The scouts report. Aurelius raises a hand, cutting him off. His mind is already elsewhere. The northern border, a minor dispute. It's another of the many small fires he has to put out. But it's all the same. His people are restless. His allies are wavering. The peasants are starving. The nobles are plotting. The weight of it all feels like 1,000 chains pulling him in every direction. "We'll send word to the border commanders," Aurelius mutters, his voice raspy from disuse. "But we won't move troops yet. Let them simmer for now. They'll tire themselves out." The council members exchange uneasy glances, but none of them speak up. They know better than to challenge the king directly. But that doesn't mean they aren't questioning him. They are all waiting for him to make a mistake. They are all watching, hoping he will falter so they can swoop in and claim the throne. "Your Majesty," Lady Cecilia, the youngest of the council, speaks up. "What of the trade routes? We have reports of increased raids in the south. The merchants are afraid to travel." Aurelius rubs his temples, trying to stave off the headache threatening to take over. He can feel the eyes of the council on him, waiting for him to decide. But the truth is, he doesn't have the energy for this anymore. He's tired of the constant pressure. He is tired of making choices that affect people's lives, knowing that no matter his actions, someone will always be angry with him. It's never enough. It's never right. "We'll send additional guards to the southern routes," he replies. "But for now, the merchants will have to make do. We can't risk more bloodshed over trade. The kingdom will collapse under its weight." The words hang in the air, heavy with the finality of a decision that feels more like a surrender than a command. The council members nod, but Aurelius can see the disappointment in their eyes. They wanted something more substantial, something more decisive. But what is there left to give? The room falls into an uneasy silence once more, and Aurelius finds himself staring at the grand tapestries that line the walls. They depict battles won and lost, kings who ruled with iron fists, and queens who wielded power with grace. They are the stories of his ancestors, his forefathers who lived and died by the sword. Their faces are proud, noble, immortalized in the fabric of time. But Aurelius is not like them. His story is not one of glory, it is one of survival. He sighs, long and slow, feeling the weight of his thoughts as much as the crown's weight on his head. Aurelius knows he is not a king like the ones in the tapestries. He is not a man of legend. He is just a man, a tired, broken man who happened to be born into a crown. "Your Majesty," Everard interrupts again, his voice calm and measured. He holds out a scroll, and Aurelius takes it with a sigh. It's more paperwork, more decisions to be made, more problems to fix, more issues to ignore. "We have a new request from the bishop," Everard continues, his voice betraying no emotion. He wants approval to melt down the silver candlesticks in the chapel to fund repairs to the roof. Aurelius raises an eyebrow, already weary of the endless stream of demands. The silver candlesticks, the ones his mother had gifted to the chapel before her death. He remembers her soft voice, warm hands, and how she comforted him when the crown's weight became too much for him to bear. She had been his strength. But now she's gone, and all he has left are these hollow relics of a past he can't escape. "No," he says firmly, the word cutting through the air like a blade. "Find another way. Keep your hands off my mother's gifts." The room goes silent. Even Everard seems taken aback by the king's sudden forcefulness. But Aurelius doesn't care. He is not the same man he once was, and there are some things he will not bend on. Not anymore. As the meeting continues, Aurelius finds his mind drifting once more. His thoughts slip away from the petty politics of the court to the vast emptiness that lies beyond the castle walls. The world is out there, waiting to be conquered, but he is no longer certain he has the strength to conquer anything. He is tired of fighting and pretending to be the man they want him to be. The meeting drags on, the council's voices blurring into the background, and Aurelius feels the crushing weight of his reins settle even more heavily upon him. His hands tremble slightly as he holds the scepter, his fingers aching from the years of handling it. The scepter, the symbol of his power, is now just another reminder of everything he has lost. Finally, as the day stretches into the afternoon, Aurelius rises from his throne, his joints protesting with every movement. The council members also stand, bowing as he leaves the room, but Aurelius doesn't notice. He strolls down the hall, his robes trailing behind him like a shadow. The kingdom is still his, but for how long? The crown weighs heavier than ever, and Aurelius wonders if there will be a day when he no longer has the strength to bear it. The castle is quiet now, but King Aurelius Thorn knows it won't last. There's always something, someone knocking at his door, demanding his attention and approval. But tonight, the hallways are empty, the grand chambers silent, as though the castle is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The flicker of torchlight against the stone walls casts long shadows, making the castle feel even more desolate than it is. Aurelius stands alone in his chambers, staring at the worn oak desk before him. It's cluttered with scrolls and letters, each more pressing than the last, but none of them matter. Not really. There are petitions for land, tax demands, and urgent letters from allies, yet Aurelius feels detached from it all. The crown's weight feels heavier on his head than ever before, a constant reminder of his failures and inability to make the kingdom work as it once did. He knows that the people are suffering, but no matter how hard he tries to fix it, the cracks spread too quickly. The fire crackles in the hearth, but the warmth does little to ease the chill that's settled deep inside him. Aurelius steps toward the window, staring out at the darkened sky. The moon hangs low, casting a pale light over the land stretching before him. The wind stirs the trees in the distance, a low whisper that seems to call to him. For a moment, he closes his eyes and listens. It's not the wind that's calling, he realizes. It's the weight of everything that has been left unsaid, the burden of a king who can never escape his throne. Aurelius turns away from the window with a sigh, running his hand through his hair. The weight of the decisions he's made sits heavy on his shoulders, and yet there's no one left to turn to. His advisors, once his closest allies, have become nothing more than distant voices, each speaking to him from their corner of the kingdom, pushing him further into isolation. He has surrounded himself with people, but no one truly sees him. Not the way they once did. Not the way they should. As he moves toward his bed, the silence of the castle presses in around him. He sinks onto the edge of the mattress, his body aching from the weight of years spent in the service of a kingdom that seems to be slipping through his fingers. He knows he should rest, that sleep would give him the clarity he desperately needs. But he can't. He can never sleep. Not when so much is left undone. So many broken promises are hanging in the air like dark clouds. His mind drifts back to the council meeting earlier in the day, to the faces of the nobles, the merchants, the peasants, each one looking to him for answers he doesn't have. He had tried to appease them with vague promises and empty assurances, but he could see it in their eyes. They no longer believed in him. They believe in the crown, title, and legacy that came before him, but not in him. He is not the man they wanted him to be, the king they thought he would be. They wanted strength, decisiveness, clarity. Instead, they have an overwhelmed ruler who is unsure of his next step. Aurelius stands up again, his boots clicking softly on the stone floor as he moves toward the door. He doesn't know where he's going. Maybe the silence drives him, the need to escape the weight of his thoughts. Perhaps it's the desperate desire for something, anything, to make sense in this kingdom that feels as broken as he is. He walks down the hallway, the flickering torchlight casting strange, dancing shadows on the walls. Every step feels heavy, like the world is trying to pull him down. As he walks, his mind drifts to the people outside the castle walls. He thinks of the peasants working the fields, their backs bent under the weight of labor. He thinks of the soldiers marching in formation, fighting battles they don't understand. He thinks of the women in the villages, their faces worn with the burdens of motherhood, of survival. They are the kingdom's lifeblood, yet he feels he's failed them all. Aurelius pauses at the end of the hallway, his hand resting on the cold stone of the wall. He can feel the crown's weight still pressing down on him, even though it is not on his head. It's a constant companion, a reminder of his duty and failure. He wonders if he will ever escape it and find a way to free himself from the suffocating grip of power. He pushes the thought away and steps into the council chamber once more. The room is empty now. The long table hosting debates and decisions is now silent. The chairs are empty, the scrolls are left unfinished, and the maps are unrolled. It's a scene of abandonment, a reminder of everything he's lost and failed to protect. Aurelius moves to the head of the table, sitting in his chair for a moment, just staring at the empty seats around him. He thinks about the faces that used to sit there, the trusted advisors, the loyal allies. They're all gone now. Some have left for other kingdoms, others have been replaced, and some have disappeared entirely. In their place, there are strangers, people he doesn't trust, and people who see him as a stepping stone to greater power. And in the end, that's all they'll ever see him as, a king to be used, a symbol to be manipulated. A sound in the doorway interrupts his thoughts. It's Tilda, his most trusted attendant. She enters quietly, as always, her footsteps soft on the stone floor. She doesn't speak at first, simply standing there waiting for him to acknowledge her. "You're still awake, Your Majesty," she says, her voice low and steady. It's not a question, it's a statement. She knows him too well. "I can't sleep," he admits, his voice rough. "Not with everything weighing on me. Not with this kingdom slipping away." Tilda steps forward, her eyes full of sympathy. "You're not the only one who feels that way, my king. But you must rest. You've done all you can for today." Aurelius looks at her, his gaze sharp. Is that all it is? Just one more day? One more task? One more problem to fix? Can a kingdom be saved by just one more day? Tilda doesn't answer immediately. She watches him, her eyes steady. "A kingdom is made up of many days, Your Majesty. It's not just about one decision. It's about every decision, every day, every person you've touched. It's not over yet." For a long moment, Aurelius says nothing. He stands up slowly, feeling the weight of Tilda's words settle into his bones. Maybe she's right. Perhaps he doesn't have to carry it all at once. Maybe, just maybe, the kingdom can be saved, not by the strength of a king, but by the strength of the people who believe in it. He looks up at her, offering a small, tired smile. "Thank you, Tilda." She nods, then turns to leave, but before she does, she says softly, "I'll be here when you need me, Your Majesty." As the door closes behind her, Aurelius stands alone again, his thoughts swirling in the room's silence. The crown's weight, the kingdom's weight, doesn't feel as heavy as it did before. For the first time in a long time, he allows himself to breathe, just for a moment. Tomorrow will come, and with it, the same struggles and burdens. But for tonight, he is not a king. He is simply a man, and that is enough. The quiet of the evening stretches on, a blanket that settles over the castle like the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions. King Aurelius Thorn stands alone in the stillness of his chambers, staring at the flickering fire as it dances in the hearth. The warmth of the flames does little to ease the coldness in his chest, the gnawing emptiness that has taken root inside him for so long. Outside, the wind howls against the stone walls as if nature is rebelling against the silence that has come to define his reign. For a moment, he wonders if he will ever escape this feeling. The feeling that the crown's weight is not a symbol of power, but of isolation. The people who once revered him now look at him suspiciously, their trust slipping through his fingers like sand. Once filled with his most trusted allies, the council has turned into a pit of ambition and self-interest, each member quietly eyeing the throne as though it belongs to someone else. Aurelius can feel the shift in the air and the subtle change in how they speak to and look at him. But no matter how much the world outside shifts, he is still the king inside the castle walls. The weight of that knowledge is both a comfort and a curse. Every decision he makes, every step he takes, is under constant scrutiny. There is no rest for him, no moment when he can be a man and not a ruler. The fire crackles again, and Aurelius is jolted from his thoughts. He reaches for the goblet of wine on the table beside him, the faint remnants of the night before still lingering in the glass. He takes a slow sip, savoring the warmth that spreads through him. For a moment, the fire's glow, the room's silence, and the comforting burn of the wine seem to offer him some reprieve. But it's fleeting. The truth always comes rushing back. His thoughts turn once again to the people, the ones who truly matter, the ones who make the kingdom tick. Aurelius knows that the weight of leadership is not just about commands or decrees. It's about the faces of the people who depend on him, the farmers who till the soil, the traders who bring goods to market, and the children who dream of a better life. They are the kingdom's heartbeat, yet he feels increasingly distant from them. The more he tries to hold it all together, the further they slip away. His mind drifts back to the council meeting earlier in the day, where the faces of his advisors were clouded with frustration, impatience, and perhaps a touch of pity. They no longer trust him to make the right decisions. They have begun to speak to him respectfully, but there's a shift in their tone, a subtle but unmistakable shift. They are all waiting for him to falter. They are all waiting for him to make a mistake. But Aurelius doesn't know how long he can keep up the act. The mask is slipping, and he wonders if anyone will still care when it finally falls away. He looks down at his hands, the same hands that once wielded swords and made decisions with confidence, now trembling slightly from the weight of too many years of stress, too many choices that have led to too many broken promises. Aurelius feels the sharp pang of guilt deep in his chest. He hasn't been the king they needed him to be. He hasn't been the king he wanted to be. The ideal of a ruler, strong, unyielding, capable, has slipped away, leaving him with only the reality of what he's become. For a long moment he sits in silence, his gaze fixed on the fire as the embers slowly fade to ash. He wonders if he's too far gone, if the damage is irreversible. There is no going back to the man he once was. The warrior king, the man with the world at his feet, is gone. The only question now is whether there's enough of him left to lead the kingdom forward. Just as the silence becomes unbearable, a soft knock at the door breaks through the quiet. It's Tilda, his most trusted attendant. She enters without waiting for permission. Her footsteps light on the stone floor. She's been with him through everything, through the good and the bad, and somehow she still hasn't given up on him. "Your Majesty," she says quietly, her voice low and steady. "The messenger from the north has arrived. He's asking to speak with you." Aurelius sighs, pushing himself up from his chair. The messenger from the north. Another problem, another crisis waiting to be dealt with. He's tired of it. Tired of the endless requests, the constant need for his attention, but he knows he must go. He must face whatever awaits him, even if he feels like he's been stretched to the breaking point. He follows Tilda through the dimly lit hallways, each step taking him further away from the peace he had briefly found in the solitude of his chambers. The castle is cold, the air thick with tension, and Aurelius feels it deep in his bones. There is no escaping it. There is no hiding from the responsibilities that come with the crown. Not anymore. The messenger is waiting in the small antechamber just beyond the council room. He stands with his head bowed, his eyes avoiding the king's gaze as though he already knows what's coming. "Your Majesty," the messenger says, his voice trembling slightly. "We've received word from the northern border. There's been an uprising. The villagers have taken arms against the tax collectors. They're demanding lower taxes or they will march to the capital." Aurelius stares at the messenger, his mind racing. An uprising, a rebellion against the crown. The very thing he has tried to avoid. The very thing he has been dreading. He feels a knot form in his stomach, but he doesn't let it show. He can't afford to show weakness now. "Prepare the troops," he orders, his voice firm though it feels foreign. "We will march at dawn." The messenger nods, clearly relieved to have his orders, but as he turns to leave, Aurelius calls out to him, "Wait." The messenger pauses, turning back with a questioning look. "Tell them to hold off," Aurelius says, his voice quieter now. "I'll go myself. I'll speak to the people. They need to know that we are listening." The messenger's eyes widen in surprise, but he nods again, bowing low before exiting. Aurelius stands in the silence of the antechamber, the weight of his decision settling in. He knows it won't be easy. He knows the people are angry and feel betrayed, perhaps rightfully so. But he can't let the kingdom slip into chaos. Not now. Not when there's still a chance to save it. He turns to Tilda, who has been standing quietly at his side, watching him with concern and admiration. "You still believe in me, don't you?" Aurelius asks, his voice rough. Tilda doesn't hesitate. "I always will, Your Majesty. You need to remember that you're not alone." Aurelius allows himself a small, tired smile for the first time in what feels like an eternity. "Thank you," he says softly. "I think I needed to hear that." And with that, he walks out of the antechamber, ready to face the kingdom slowly slipping through his grasp. The morning sun barely peeks over the horizon when King Aurelius Thorn emerges from the shadows of his chambers. It's a bitterly cold morning when the air seems to bite at your skin, and even the bravest soldiers would prefer to remain wrapped in their blankets, shielded from the world. But not Aurelius. He's never had the luxury of turning his back on responsibility, not for as long as he's been king. And today, his kingdom needs him more than ever. The message from the north still weighs heavily on his mind. An uprising. Disillusioned by years of hardship, the people have risen against the crown. They march, demanding justice, demanding change. They want more than just empty promises. They want action. But how could he give them what they want when he's struggling to hold everything together? Deep down, Aurelius knows that the rebellion is not just about taxes, hunger, or poverty. Dad, it's about something more profound, something he hasn't been able to see until now. It's about trust, or rather, the lack of it. The people no longer trust their king, and for good reason. He spent so many years in his gilded cage, surrounded by walls of power and privilege, that he completely forgot what it meant to listen, to truly see the suffering of the people who built this kingdom. He's been blinded by the weight of the crown, by the endless procession of courtiers and nobles, each one clamoring for his attention, his favor. They've all been feeding him lies, telling him what he wants to hear, while the world outside crumbled. Aurelius stands before his mirror now, staring at the man who looks back at him, the man who was once a fierce warrior, a conqueror, a king who commanded respect. But now all he sees is a tired soul, broken by the years of ruling, consumed by the very power he once wielded with confidence. His reflection is not the one he remembers. Worry lines mark the face before him, the eyes clouded with uncertainty, the mouth set in a grimace of exhaustion. The crown that rests beside him on the table doesn't seem like a symbol of greatness. It feels like a burden, a weight that's been wearing him down for far too long. He picks it up slowly, the gold cold against his fingers. For a moment he hesitates, the weight of it almost too much to bear. This is the symbol of his kingdom, which has defined him for as long as he can remember. But what is it worth now? What does it mean to rule, when the people no longer believe in you. Aurelius puts the crown on his head, the cold metal settling into place, a constant reminder of the responsibility he cannot escape. He knows that today will be different. He has no choice but to face the rebellion head on. There's no more room for doubt, no more room for hesitation. The people want a king who listens and understands their pain, not just someone who gives orders from behind stone walls. The cold air hits him like a slap as he leaves his chambers. It's a bracing reminder that he's not in control of everything, that even a king cannot control the weather or the people's hearts. He walks through the castle halls, each step echoing like a drumbeat, signaling the march of destiny. His guards salute him as he passes, their faces impassive, unreadable. For a moment he wonders if they too have begun to doubt him, if they too feel the weight of the kingdom crumbling beneath their feet. The council chambers are quiet when he enters. The usual murmurs stop and the room falls into a heavy silence. Aurelius takes his seat at the head of the table, his eyes scanning the faces of the men and women who once stood by him, who once believed in him. Now, they look at him skeptically, their loyalty hanging by a thread. He doesn't blame them. He feels the same way about himself. "Your Majesty," Lord Eldrick begins, his voice strained as if even he is uncertain how to proceed. "The rebels have begun to move toward the capital. We've received word that they will arrive by nightfall. What are your orders?" Aurelius takes a deep breath, his mind racing as the moment's weight settles. This is it. The moment he's been dreading, the moment that will decide the fate of his kingdom. His hands tremble slightly, but he steadies himself, drawing on the strength that has carried him this far. "We will meet them," he says, his voice firm but his heart heavy. "We will not hide behind walls. We will face them head on, in the open. We will show them that we are not afraid." The council members exchange nervous glances, unsure of what to make of his decision. Aurelius can feel the tension in the room, the unease that lingers in the air. They want him to be a king who gives orders and commands his armies with authority. They want a warrior, a leader. But that's not who he is anymore. He can't be the king they want him to be. He can only be the king he is. "We will send word to the people," he continues, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "We will remind them that we are all part of the same kingdom, all fighting for the same future." As the council members begin to discuss the logistics of the upcoming confrontation, Aurelius withdraws into his thoughts. The rebellion is not just a political issue. It's personal. It reflects everything he has failed to do, everything he has failed to be. He has spent too much time trying to appease the nobles, the merchants, and the court. He has neglected the people who need him the most, the ones who struggle daily and sacrifice everything to survive. He remembers the face of a young peasant, a boy who had come to the castle years ago, asking for help. The boy's family had been starving, their crops failing, their homes falling apart. Aurelius had promised to help them to make things better, but he had failed. The boy's family had been forgotten, lost in court politics. And now that same boy's voice is among the voices calling for justice. Aurelius feels a pang of guilt in his chest. He has failed them all. And now they are rising against him. The council meeting continues, but Aurelius isn't listening anymore. His mind is racing, his thoughts spinning out of control. He's a king, yes, but he's also a man who is desperate for something, anything, to make sense of this madness. He knows that this rebellion will be a turning point. It will either make or break him. There's no middle ground. He stands suddenly, the chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. "We'll face them at the gates," he says, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "Prepare the men. I will lead them myself." As he walks out of the room, the weight of his decision presses down on him like never before. This is it. There's no turning back now. The kingdom is on the brink of chaos, and only one thing is sure. Whatever happens next will change everything. The day has finally come. The tension in the air is so thick that it feels as though the very earth beneath King Aurelius Thorn's feet might crack open at any moment. The rebellion is no longer just a whisper in the wind. It has become a full-blown storm, and now it's marching toward the capital. Aurelius can feel it in his bones. The reckoning is at hand. The castle walls seem to close around him as he stands in his war room, staring at the map before him. The lines of the kingdom are marked with red, like veins coursing with blood, pulsing toward the capital. His heart races, but his expression remains stoic. The war room is eerily quiet. The usual sounds of hushed whispers and hurried footsteps are replaced with a suffocating silence. The air is heavy with the weight of decisions that could save or destroy them. He's surrounded by the remnants of the court's finest minds, his generals, his advisors, the men and women who are supposed to stand by him, yet somehow they all seem distant now. Aurelius knows the truth. They may serve him, but they do not follow him, not in the way they once did. "Your Majesty," says General Caden, his voice stern, breaking through the stillness. "The rebels are within striking distance. If we don't act soon, they will have us surrounded. We'll be trapped in the capital with no way out." Aurelius doesn't respond immediately. Instead, he gazes out the narrow window of the war room. The city below is alive, the sounds of the people drifting up to him. They have no idea what is coming. The streets are bustling with merchants, soldiers, and civilians, oblivious to the storm heading their way. But he knows. He knows what's coming, and he feels the weight of the decision that rests squarely on his shoulders. He turns back to face the table, the map in front of him, and the faces of his generals, each one waiting for him to give the order. The time has come. There's no more room for hesitation. There's no more time to wait. His choice today will either preserve the kingdom or shatter it completely. "We don't have the luxury of waiting any longer," Aurelius says, his voice low but firm. "We'll take the fight to them. We'll face them head on. I'll lead the charge." The room falls into stunned silence. For a moment, no one moves, no one breathes. The idea of the king leading the army and fighting alongside his men is unthinkable to many. A king does not fight on the front lines. A king commands from the safety of his throne. But Aurelius knows better. He knows that the throne has never been about safety. It has always been about sacrifice. "We'll send word to the men," General Caden finally says, his voice tinged with reluctance. "But you do understand the risks, Your Majesty. You'll be in the thick of the charge if you lead the charge. There's no telling what could happen." "I understand," Aurelius replies, his gaze unwavering, "but this is the only way. The people need to see that I'm with them. I'm not hiding behind walls. To survive this, we must show them we are willing to fight for them." The generals exchange glances, but they say nothing. They know better than to argue with the king. Aurelius stands tall, feeling the weight of his decision settle over him like a thick cloak. This is no longer about strategy or tactics. This is about trust. They will lose faith in him if he doesn't lead them into battle. If he doesn't show the people he is willing to sacrifice everything, he might as well surrender the throne. The next few hours are a blur of preparation. Orders are sent out, soldiers begin to gather their weapons, and the city is thrown into a frenzy of activity. Aurelius watches it all from the war room, his heart pounding. A part of him wonders if he's making a grave mistake, but that part is quickly drowned out by the voice of reason, which tells him he has no other choice. As the sun sets and the last rays of light disappear beyond the horizon, Aurelius rides out of the castle gates. The streets are lined with people, hopeful, some anxious, all looking up at him, waiting for him to lead them to victory or doom. The army stands ready, their weapons gleaming in the fading light. They are loyal, but Aurelius can see the uncertainty in their eyes. They're unsure if he's still the man he once was, who led them to battle and inspired them with his strength and courage. But today, he will show them he still has what it takes. The march to the north is slow and grueling. The rebels are close, and every step they take brings them closer to a confrontation that will change everything. The night is thick with tension, the only sound being the rhythmic march of boots on dirt and armor clinking. Aurelius rides at the front, his sword at his side, his mind focused on the task ahead. But as the hours drag on, he can't shake the feeling that something is wrong. The air feels thick with anticipation, and the moon overhead grows darker with each passing moment. The tension is unbearable when they reach the outskirts of the rebel camp. Aurelius dismounts from his horse, his armor clanking loudly as he moves. The generals and soldiers behind him follow suit, their faces grim, ready for whatever comes next. Aurelius stands at the edge of the camp, his eyes scanning the horizon, waiting for the first signs of the enemy. He doesn't know what to expect. He doesn't know if the rebels will stand down, if they'll surrender, or if they'll fight to the death. The first sound of movement comes from the shadows. The rebels have arrived, and they are not alone. The ground shakes with the force of their footsteps, and soon, Aurelius is face to face with the leader of the rebellion, a man he once knew, a man who was once a trusted advisor. But now, he is the enemy. The same man who once swore loyalty to Aurelius is now standing before him, a sword in hand, a fire in his eyes. "Your Majesty," the rebel leader says, his voice cold and filled with disdain. "You should have listened. Now it's too late." Aurelius feels the moment's weight, the truth settling in like a stone in his stomach. This isn't just a battle for the kingdom, it's a battle for his very soul. He takes a step forward, his sword gleaming in the moonlight. "Then let's settle it," he says, his voice steady, his heart pounding, once and for all. The two men stare at each other, the distance between them filled with the weight of betrayal and lost trust. In that moment, Aurelius knows that this battle is not just about power, it's about redemption. The kingdom may be bound to collapse, but he will fight for it. He will fight for the people who still believe in him. And so the battle begins. The clash was sudden. No horn was blown, no grand declaration made, just the shrill cry of metal meeting metal and the heavy rhythm of boots thundering against the frozen earth. King Aurelius Thorn raised his sword just in time to deflect a blow aimed at his head, the force of it sending vibrations through his bones. The man who had swung at him, a rebel, face hidden behind a cloth mask, fell back, but not before Aurelius landed a precise strike across his chest. The rebel collapsed, motionless, and Aurelius didn't even pause. There was no time to mourn, no time to reflect. The battlefield had no regard for title or bloodline. Out here, a king was just another man trying to stay alive. The rebel army, though less equipped, fought with a ferocity that surprised even his most hardened soldiers. They weren't just fighting for food or shelter, they were fighting for dignity, for a voice, for justice they believed had been denied. Aurelius knew this, and it twisted something in his chest. With every swing of his sword, with every life taken, the line between justice and duty blurred further. Behind him, General Caden barked commands, his voice hoarse from shouting, trying to hold the flanks together as rebel forces surged. The forest surrounding the battlefield offered little visibility. Smoke from the torches mingled with the early morning fog, making every movement a guess and every shadow a possible threat. Aurelius pushed forward, his blade flashing through the mist. He had to find him, the rebel leader. Torren Vallis, once his closest advisor, once his most trusted friend. Now, the architect of this uprising. Aurelius had hoped their confrontation would be words first, blades second. But Torren had made it clear. There would be no negotiations, no more diplomacy. This was war. "Push toward the ridge," Caden shouted. "They're regrouping by the old watchtower." Aurelius turned in that direction, his eyes narrowing. The old watchtower. Of course, it had once served as a lookout post during the Eastern campaigns. Torren had commanded it then. It would be fitting for him to make his stand there now. Aurelius motioned to a cluster of his guards. "With me." They carved a path through the chaos, climbing the ridge as screams echoed below. Dead and wounded littered the hillside. As they neared the summit, the din faded slightly, and the outline of the watchtower emerged through the fog. There he was. Torren stood tall near the base, surrounded by his elite fighters. His armor was mismatched, worn, likely gathered from fallen battles. But he held himself with the same calm authority that had once made him invaluable to Aurelius. The king approached, sword drawn, eyes locked with his former friend. Torren stepped forward, lowering his own blade slightly in greeting, but not in surrender. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice unshaken. "You gave me no choice," Aurelius replied. Torren's face twisted in pain, or was it regret? "You gave me no choice. I begged you to listen. I sat in those meetings and watched you nod while doing nothing. The harvests failed, the taxes bled our people dry. I warned you, and you looked away." Aurelius tightened his grip on the hilt. "I failed, yes, but I never turned away. I was trying to hold together a kingdom with cracks in every stone. You should have helped me fix it, not set fire to it." "I did help," Torren said, voice rising. "But no one listens to whispers behind gold doors. I had to make you hear us." They stood in silence, the air between them charged with the weight of history, betrayal, and something unspoken. Grief. Grief for the kingdom they both loved, for the man each thought the other had become. "This doesn't have to end here. Aurelius said quietly. We could still. But Torin had already lifted his sword. It always had to end here. The duel began not with an explosion, but a single clash, steel ringing out against steel. Each strike was personal, each block a memory. They knew each other's strengths, their weaknesses, their tendencies. What had once made them an unstoppable team now made them deadly enemies. Blow for blow, they circled the battlefield near the tower, the fight echoing down to the soldiers below, who had paused, watching in grim silence. It was no longer just a battle of armies, it was a battle of symbols, of old loyalties tested, of what it meant to lead. Torin lunged, but Aurelius sidestepped, countering with a deep slice across Torin's shoulder. Blood stained the rebel's tunic, but he didn't stop. He fought harder, driven by something far more powerful than pain. Belief. Conviction. You could have been great. Torin spat between clenched teeth. I still can, Aurelius said, parrying again if we stop this madness. But Torin's answer came in a scream and a final, desperate swing. Aurelius blocked it and in a single, smooth motion, plunged his sword into Torin's side. Time seemed to halt. Torin's eyes widened, then softened. His body slumped against the king, and Aurelius caught him, lowering him gently to the ground. Torin coughed, blood staining his lips. You were always too slow to act. And you were too quick to destroy, Aurelius whispered. A long silence passed between them. Then, with one final breath, Torin's body went still. The fog lifted slightly, as if the sky itself had been holding its breath. Aurelius stood, covered in blood and ash, but not triumphant. This wasn't victory, this was consequence. He looked out over the field. Some rebels still fought, others had stopped, weapons falling from their hands, seeing their leader dead. His soldiers didn't cheer, they simply waited, watching him, waiting for a king. Aurelius raised his hand, not in command, not in celebration, but in signal. Enough, he said, loud enough to carry. The fighting stopped. Across the battlefield, weapons lowered. Men dropped to their knees. Not in defeat, but in exhaustion. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was not empty. It was full of questions, full of hope. Aurelius turned back toward the tower where Torin lay. Let him be buried with honor, he said to his men. He fought not for power, but for people. And then, shoulders slumped, sword dragging behind him, the king walked down the hill. He had survived the battle, but he would never be the same again. The journey back to the capital was silent. No fanfare, no songs. Just the soft shuffle of boots through mud and ash, the metallic whisper of armor shifting, and the distant caw of birds that circled overhead, drawn by the smell of what had been lost. King Aurelius Thorn rode at the front, but even he wasn't leading in the traditional sense. It felt more like drifting. Each hoofbeat a reminder that while he may have won the battle, something within him had been irreversibly broken. Beside him, his horse snorted and twitched, sensing his unease. Behind him, his men followed, bruised, bloodied, changed. The weight of the rebellion's collapse clung to them like smoke, heavy and inescapable. They had witnessed more than a conflict. They had seen a king kill his former friend, and not for glory, not for conquest, but because neither man knew another way to stop the fire from spreading. The weather turned colder as they neared the gates. A gray sky blanketed the city, casting long, heavy shadows across the stone walls. The streets were lined with citizens, men, women, children, faces pale and expectant. They had heard the rumors, the whispers, that the rebellion had been crushed, that the king himself had returned. But what they saw wasn't a conquering hero. It was a weary figure, slouched in the saddle, blood still on his armor, eyes fixed on the ground ahead. The cheering never came. Instead, a hushed silence swept across the crowd as Aurelius passed. Some bowed their heads, others simply stared, and a few turned away, unsure what to feel. He dismounted at the palace steps, handing off the reins to a stable hand without a word. His joints ached with every step up the marble staircase. Inside the great hall, the warmth of the braziers should have been comforting, but it only made the weight on his shoulders feel heavier. Waiting for him at the throne was Lady Serana, head of the council. Her eyes, sharp as ever, scanned his face before she spoke. It's done then, he nodded. And Torin? Aurelius's jaw tensed. Dead. I killed him. She looked away for a moment, not in surprise but in resignation. He was your friend. He was more than that, Aurelius said, voice quiet but hard. He was right. Serana blinked, caught off guard. About what? About me. About how distant I'd become. How blind I was to the suffering beneath my own roof. How I let fear of losing control drive me to silence the voices that needed to be heard. He sat, not on the throne, but on the steps below it, like a man too tired to pretend he still belonged above everyone else. He placed his sword beside him, its tip scraping against the stone floor with a sharp metallic note that echoed in the chamber. I saw their faces, Serana, he continued. The rebels. They weren't traitors. They were farmers, bakers, fathers, sons. They didn't hate the kingdom. They hated what it had turned into. For a long moment, Serana said nothing. Then she walked to him, kneeling slightly to meet his eyes. And now, what will you do? Aurelius let out a breath that felt like it had been waiting to escape for days. I'll rebuild, he said, but not from this seat, not from behind these walls. She tilted her head. You mean to step down? He shook his head. I mean to step out. I'll walk among them. Listen, ask questions, apologize, earn back what I lost. That could be seen as weakness. Then let it be. Strength without humility is what led us here in the first place. The next morning, the court awoke to news that stunned even the most jaded nobles. The king would leave the palace and walk the streets as a common man, without his crown, without his guards. Just a cloak, boots, and a name. No one believed it, not until they saw him. He walked through the lower markets with his hood drawn, stopping to watch a boy mend his father's broken shoe, to speak with a vendor selling stale bread at half price, to sit beside an old man playing a flute with only 3 fingers left. He asked questions, he listened, and he never once announced who he was. In the evenings, he would return, not to his chambers, but to the infirmaries. He helped bind wounds, he fetched water, he learned the names of those he had ruled, and they slowly learned the name of the man behind the crown. Not everyone forgave him. Some cursed him when they recognized his face. Some spat at the ground and turned away. He didn't flinch. He never answered with anger, only silence, or a simple, I'm sorry. The days turned to weeks. On one such day, a young woman stopped him in the market. Her hands were calloused from work, her eyes sharp and unforgiving. You're the king who let my brother starve, she said. Aurelius met her gaze. Yes, I am. And what now? You think walking around without your crown makes it better? No, he said, but maybe listening is the first step toward doing better. She stared at him, arms crossed. Then, without a word, she handed him a loaf of bread. For your journey, she said. It's old, but still good, he nodded. Like this kingdom. That night, back in the castle, Serana awaited him. You're changing things, she said. No, he replied. They are. In the north, the fires of rebellion had died down, replaced with cautious hope. The soldiers who once marched for revenge were now returning home to rebuild. The people in the capital, once silent in fear, had begun to speak again, in cafes, in temples, in town halls, and for the first time in years, the king listened. But in private, when the palace was still and the world was quiet, Aurelius would return to his study and unfold an old, weathered map, one marked not with borders and strongholds, but with villages and farms, forests and valleys. The kingdom he had ruled, the kingdom he had broken, and the kingdom he still believed could rise again. Each night, he'd add a mark for every person he'd spoken to, every hand he'd shaken, every name he didn't want to forget. He had once worn a crown of gold. Now he carried one of memory. And memory, he had learned, was heavier. But it was the only weight he was willing to bear. There were few things more unsettling than silence inside the palace walls. Not the poised, ceremonial silence of royal decrees or hushed conversations behind velvet curtains, but the kind that sinks into stone and lingers like a ghost. It was the kind of silence that King Aurelius Thorn had grown all too familiar with since returning from the battlefield and stripping himself of the comforts that had once separated him from his people. His days now passed not in the grand throne room, but in the lesser chambers among scholars, scribes, and cartographers. He no longer signed royal edicts with a flourish of indifference. He read every name, every law, every grievance, and in the margins of those official documents, he scribbled personal notes, questions, doubts, and plans to fix what had been broken for far too long. But change, even when led by the king himself, was never welcomed without suspicion. The old guard, the noble houses, the merchant guilds, and the high clergy had grown restless. For years, they had fed off a bloated system, one that kept them well fed while the common folk clawed through hardship. Now that system was under siege. not by swords or fire, but by quiet reform. And to the powerful, nothing was more dangerous than a king who finally started listening. One evening, as Aurelius sat reviewing petitions in a modest study by candlelight, Lady Serana entered with a guarded look. "We need to talk," she said. He didn't look up. "If it's about the Western tariffs, I've already spoken to the grain merchants. They agreed to drop prices if we—" "It's not tariffs," she interrupted. "It's the council. There's a motion being circulated to challenge your authority. They're calling it a stability protocol, but it's a power grab. They want to reinstate emergency rule, limit your reforms, bring decisions back to vote." He set his quill down, the ink still wet on the page. "How many support it?" "Enough," she said, lowering her voice. "House Marin is leading it. House Vale is on the fence. The guilds are watching closely. If they sway, the rest will follow." He leaned back in his chair, staring at the flickering flame. "They think I've gone soft." "They think you've gone rogue," Serana replied. "Kings don't carry water, they don't walk the slums, and they certainly don't let farmers draft policy." Aurelius didn't flinch. "Then they've forgotten what a king is supposed to be." Serana stepped forward. "This isn't about forgetting. This is about control. They tolerated your changes while the rebellion scared them. Now that the dust has settled, they want the old order back." He stood, moving toward the window that overlooked the courtyard. Below, torchlight flickered among the trees. He could see the guards rotating posts, the quiet buzz of evening life beginning to wind down. Somewhere beyond those walls were the people he had come to know. The children who smiled at him when he brought bread, the elders who told him of forgotten roads and names buried by time. "I won't stop," he said quietly. "I know," Serana replied, "but you need to be ready. They'll do more than vote. If they feel threatened, they'll act." Aurelius turned to face her. "Then let them. If the throne is so fragile it can't withstand honesty, maybe it should fall." The following week was tense. Whispers moved faster than orders. Meetings were held in shadowed corridors. Allies became scarce. Every gesture was interpreted as a strategy, every silence as guilt. The royal court, once bloated with ceremony, now felt like a nest of vipers, quiet, coiled, and ready to strike. Aurelius did not retreat. Instead, he advanced. He summoned the council, not to defend himself, but to confront them. They gathered in the Hall of Lanterns, where golden light spilled from hundreds of suspended glass globes. It was a chamber meant for unity, built generations ago to encourage openness. Tonight, it felt like a trial. The lords and ladies took their seats, their faces carefully composed. The high merchant of the Southern Guild fidgeted with his ring. The Archbishop of the Citadel sat with his fingers steepled. Lord Bren of House Marin wore a satisfied smirk, as if he were watching the final act of a play he'd already predicted. Aurelius entered alone, no fanfare, no trumpets. He wore no crown, no ornate cloak, just a deep blue tunic, dust from the streets still clinging to the hem. "I've heard your concerns," he began, standing at the center of the circle, "and I understand them. Change is frightening. Power, once shared, feels like loss to those used to holding it alone." Lord Bren leaned forward. "With respect, Your Majesty, this isn't about fear, it's about order. The kingdom cannot survive if policy is dictated by peasants and decisions made by personal feeling." Aurelius met his gaze. Policy was already being dictated by something worse: apathy. And personal feeling? Yes. I feel personally responsible for the suffering my inaction caused. That's why I choose to act. A murmur spread through the room. "The rebellion," he continued, "was not just a revolt. It was a mirror, one I can no longer ignore. I've walked the roads. I've seen what you refuse to see. The people are not broken. They are resilient. They are wise, and they deserve a seat at the table." The Archbishop raised a hand. "And if your reforms lead to chaos, if removing centuries-old structures opens the gates to lawlessness?" Aurelius nodded. "Then I will bear that weight, as I bore the blade at the front lines, as I bore the crown when none of you would." There was a long pause. No one spoke, not because they were convinced, but because they hadn't expected him to meet them with such raw truth. "I am not asking for permission," he said, his voice rising just enough to echo. "I am telling you this. The throne will not return to silence, not while I sit on it." He left the council hall to silence once more, but this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of disruption. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. Farmers began receiving letters, official decrees inviting them to form local councils. Merchants, long taxed by corrupt lords, were allowed to petition directly for reforms. Roads that had been impassable for years were cleared by orders signed in the king's hand. And in the palace, something else changed. The whispers began to fade. Some nobles still resisted, of course. Power doesn't go quietly, but others, especially younger lords and stewards, began to see the shift not as a threat, but as a chance to lead with purpose, a chance to matter. Late one evening, Serana found Aurelius in the archive room, surrounded by scrolls. "You stirred the hornet's nest," she said. He glanced up. "Good. Now maybe they'll finally look outside the hive." She smiled faintly. "There's still much to do." "There always will be," he replied. "But for the first time in years, we're doing it for the right reasons." Outside, the bells of the city began to ring, not in alarm, not in mourning, but in marking the hour, a new kingdom, a king who had remembered what it meant to serve, and a people who had remembered how to hope. The first true test of Aurelius Thorne's new path didn't come from noble whispers or rebellious echoes. It came from the east, from the hills beyond the forested borderlands, where wildfires hadn't just scorched the trees, but had begun to eat into the very edge of the kingdom's forgotten provinces. What began as a seasonal blaze driven by dry winds and carelessness had become a roaring catastrophe, consuming homes, villages, farmlands. And unlike war, fire didn't negotiate. By the time word reached the capital, 3 towns had already vanished beneath smoke and ash. Entire communities fled west, carrying only what they could grasp in panicked arms. Livestock ran wild through cracked roads, rivers turned dark with soot. Refugees poured into the outer districts of the capital like water through a broken dam. Aurelius didn't hesitate. There were no long council sessions, no months of debate. He convened his closest aides, looked them each in the eye, and gave an order none of them expected. "We go east. We meet this fire as one." They argued, of course. Serana reminded him that a king in a disaster zone was a logistical nightmare, that his presence might slow relief, that he could direct resources more effectively from within the palace walls. But Aurelius had learned something war and peace had both failed to teach him. Leadership wasn't about distance. It was about presence. So he left. 3 days later, he stood in the town square of Emberlin, a settlement once rich with timber and trade, now little more than scorched beams and hollowed homes. The air was thick with smoke and grief. People didn't bow when they saw him. Many didn't recognize him at all. He was covered in ash, his cloak stiff with soot, his crown left behind in the capital. And that was just the way he wanted it. He helped stack sandbags along the riverbank to block the creeping flames. He fetched water. He carried children from tents to carts, and when the sky cracked open with orange embers in the dead of night, he stood shoulder to shoulder with the villagers, forming a line to beat back the sparks with wet cloth and trembling arms. They called him mad at first, but then they started calling him something else, their own. One night after the fire had died down, but before the healing began, he sat by a dying hearth with an old woman whose home had turned to cinders. "You're the king, aren't you?" she asked, her voice like parchment. He didn't lie. "I am." "You don't look like one." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's a good thing." She studied him a long while, then nodded. "You look like my back from the war, tired, but still standing." Still standing. The phrase clung to him, because that's what the kingdom had to do now. Not rejoice, not rest. Just stand. When Aurelius returned to the capital weeks later, his presence triggered something deeper than admiration. The people had seen him, not as a figure in paintings or rumors, but as a man who dug through ash, who bled and sweated alongside them. The reports from the east followed him like a second shadow. The nobles, once so confident in their opposition, began to fracture. Some stayed silent, others shifted allegiance. And more still requested private audiences, seeking to understand, to align, or at the very least, not to be left behind. The king's popularity was no longer political, it was personal, but trouble was never far behind. One morning, as Aurelius reviewed plans to rebuild Emberlin, a courier arrived. His hands shook as he delivered the letter. Its wax seal cracked from the journey. The message was brief. "Your reforms have inspired the wrong people. The Western lords march, they call it a restoration." Aurelius stared at the words, pulse slow but thunderous. the Restoration, a poetic term for an ugly truth. The old houses were rising, not with the aim of compromise but of conquest. They had gathered in secret, building armies in forgotten forts, funding militias with gold smuggled through church coffers and trade ships, and now they marched, not toward negotiation but toward siege. Serana stood beside him, reading over his shoulder. "You know what they want." "I do," he said. "They want the throne back, the old ways, a king behind stained glass and iron gates." He folded the letter. "Then they'll have to take it from my hands." This time, he didn't ride alone. The army that followed Aurelius wasn't like the ones of old. It wasn't built from obligation or fear. It was formed from gratitude, from blacksmiths who owed him shelter, from farmers whose soil he'd knelt in, from traders who'd watched him carry injured men across rivers. It was an army of believers. When he reached the fields of Kalanor, the sky was an endless gray, as if even the heavens had grown tired of battle. Across the plain, the banners of the Western lords stood proud, emblems of lions, serpents, and falcons, carried by soldiers paid in coin and promises of restored power. Aurelius didn't make a speech. He stood at the front, drew his sword, not the ceremonial one, but the blade he'd carried through the rebellion, and said only this: "They want the past. We give them the future." The battle was brutal, not because of its length, it lasted only hours, but because of its weight. It wasn't just men clashing, it was ideologies. History itself groaning beneath the crush of change. Aurelius fought with fire in his limbs, with clarity in his strikes. He didn't fight to protect a crown, he fought to protect a second chance. By dusk, the Western lords had fallen, some dead, some captured, others vanished into the hills. The Restoration was over before it truly began. In its place stood something else, the idea that a kingdom could rise not from tradition, but from truth. Back in the capital, as bells rang, not in mourning, but in awakening, Aurelius stood again before the council. But this time, he was not alone. Representatives from the eastern towns, guild leaders from the markets, even a stonemason from Emberlin, all stood beside him. "This is not a throne," he told the chamber. "This is a circle. We sit at it together, or not at all." Some objected, others nodded, but no one could deny the change. That night, as he walked alone through the garden, a small voice called out, "King Aurelius." He turned to see a boy, barefoot, no more than 7, holding out a folded piece of paper. "I drew you," the boy said, "fighting the fire, like a knight." Aurelius took the paper gently. On it, a crude drawing of a man with a crown in one hand and a bucket of water in the other. Aurelius smiled. "Thank you. What's your name?" "Jaren." "Jaren," the king said, "you just gave me more than most lords ever have." The boy beamed, and in that quiet garden, beneath a sky that finally seemed clear, Aurelius Thorn realized something profound. The kingdom wasn't just healing, it was becoming something new. It had been nearly a year since the firestorms of the East and the failed march of the Western lords. In that time, King Aurelius Thorn had grown accustomed to being more than a ruler. He had become a symbol of renewal, of humility, of quiet strength rising from ashes. His image, once polished and distant, had become worn and familiar. Children no longer bowed, they ran up to him with drawings and questions. Elders no longer whispered judgments, they offered stories and warnings, wisdom earned the hard way. And yet, not all saw this new king as a beacon. Some saw opportunity, others saw threat. In the far reaches of the southern coast, beyond the salt dunes of Carith Bay, a whisper was rising. It came not from nobility or rebellion, but from something far older. The High Temple of the Veil, a secretive order cloaked in tradition, revered in silence, feared in rumor. Once loyal to the crown, they had kept to themselves for generations, guiding spiritual life, preserving relics, and some believed hoarding powers that dated back to before the founding of the kingdom itself. They had remained quiet through the wars, the reforms, even the fire. But now something stirred. It began with letters. Not threats, prophecies. Warnings wrapped in scripture, declaring Aurelius' path as one against the natural order. They called him the King of Broken Circles, a phrase that made little sense at first, until it began to appear painted on stone walls in remote towns, etched into market stalls, murmured in prayer-like tones. Aurelius was no stranger to resistance, but this felt different. Not political, not even human. He summoned Lady Serana and a trusted group of advisors to the inner chamber. Laid before them were the letters, strange and poetic, signed not with names, but symbols, circles split by jagged lines. The High Temple? Serana asked, narrowing her eyes. They haven't spoken to a monarch in 3 generations. They're speaking now, Aurelius replied, voice steady. Or someone wants us to believe they are. One of the guards, a young man named Eldon, stepped forward hesitantly. My family's from Kerith, sire. There's something you should know. Aurelius motioned for him to continue. There are stories, Eldon said, shifting uncomfortably. Old ones, about the temple's vault. They say it holds something that sees time differently, that those who listen to it don't come back the same. The room fell into a heavy silence. You believe this? Serana asked, incredulous. I believe the people believe it, Eldon said. And if the temple has decided you're part of some ancient prophecy, true or not, it could fracture everything we've built. Aurelius didn't scoff. He'd seen too much, of war, of fire, of humanity, to dismiss the strange. And deep inside, something told him this was not a matter to be left to messengers or maps. I'm going to Kerith, he said. No, Serana said immediately. You've walked into battlefields, fires, and council chambers full of knives. But this is fog. There's nothing solid to fight here. I won't fight, Aurelius said softly. I'll ask, I'll listen. If they have truth, I'll face it. If they have fear, I'll dispel it. He left at dawn with a small party. No banners, no titles, just cloaks, provisions, and an open mind. The journey south was longer than any map promised. The air grew saltier, the nights colder, the roads quieter, villages thinned, trees bowed like watchers, birds flew in patterns that made no sense. When they arrived at the foot of the cliffs overlooking Kerith Bay, the temple revealed itself, not through grand spires or golden gates, but through simplicity. A wide, gray stone structure carved into the cliffside itself. No guards, no walls, just silence. As Aurelius approached, the great door opened on its own. Inside, torchlight flickered along ancient murals, stars falling into oceans, kings kneeling before robed figures with empty faces, a tree growing upside down. The hall echoed not with footsteps, but with memory. At the end stood a single figure. She wore robes of layered silver, her face veiled in sheer fabric. Her voice, when she spoke, was neither young nor old. King who walks without a crown, she said, you have crossed into knowing. Aurelius didn't flinch. I seek understanding, not dominance. Your messages have stirred fear. I came to ask why. The woman tilted her head, as if listening to something only she could hear. You broke the line, she said. You cracked the cycle. The crown was meant to endure. You let it breathe. I let it live, Aurelius corrected. The kingdom was dying in silence. I gave it voice. And in that voice, she said, stepping closer, you have awakened the old rhythms. Change begets balance. Balance begets return. He frowned. Return of what? She raised her hand. The wall behind her shimmered, revealing a massive circular carving, fractured, glowing faintly. Symbols moved within it like oil across water. The last time a king listened to the people, she whispered, a veil tore, the stars burned, and the deep ones stirred. Aurelius didn't understand. Not fully, but something inside him shifted. A dread not of war, but of consequence. Is this prophecy, he asked, or warning? She gave no answer. Instead, she reached into her sleeve and handed him a stone, smooth, black, and warm to the touch. This is a key, she said, but keys open both ways. He looked down. The stone bore the same jagged circle from the letters. When he looked up, she was gone. The torchlight flickered. The temple hummed. Aurelius left, stone in hand, mind racing. They returned to the capital in silence. Serana met him at the gates, searching his face for signs of madness or revelation. What happened? She asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he handed her the stone. Something old is waking, he said, and I don't know if we're ready for it. She turned the stone in her palm. Is it magic? No, he said. It's history, a history we forgot, one that never forgot us. That night, he stood in the observatory, staring at the stars. One pulsed faintly, blue, then red, then gone. The kingdom of Thorn had survived rebellion, fire, and betrayal. But what lay ahead would be something else entirely. Not a battle of swords, a battle of memory. And memory, Aurelius knew too well, had sharp edges. The stars over Thornavale burned strangely that night. No longer steady companions of the sky, but twitching sparks as if blinking against some unseen disturbance. King Aurelius Thorn stood alone in the eastern tower, clutching the obsidian stone the temple had given him. It pulsed faintly now, soft, rhythmic, like a heartbeat that wasn't his own. He hadn't told anyone it had begun to glow. Not Serana, not the council, not even the boy, Jaren. Something had shifted since Kareth. It wasn't just politics anymore. This felt older, deeper, heavier. As the wind whispered through the arrow slits, Aurelius could almost hear words in the rustling, fragments of languages he didn't know but somehow understood. Return, awaken, remember. That night, he did not sleep. At dawn, a rider arrived from the northern outpost, panicked, soaked in river mud, his eyes wild with confusion. "Sire," the man stammered, kneeling, "something's happened at the barrows." Aurelius's stomach tightened. The barrows of Haldenreach were ancient burial mounds, long abandoned and half swallowed by moss. No one went there anymore. No one dared. Even the mapmakers left them out. "What kind of something?" the king asked. The rider swore. "The ground cracked open. There's light coming from beneath, and the villagers, they say they hear singing, but there's no one there." Aurelius turned to Serana. Her eyes said what they both already knew. The temple's warning hadn't been metaphor. It had been instruction. They left that very hour. The journey to Haldenreach was harder than expected. Roads once passable had collapsed into the earth. The river that cut through the woods now ran backwards, twisting through the forest like it was searching for something. Birds flew in perfect circles. At one point, the party passed a tree, split down the center. Not by lightning or wind, but something cleaner, as though the bark had been unzipped. As they approached the barrows, the horses refused to go further. They reared and brayed, wide-eyed with terror. The group continued on foot. The scene was worse than described. A gaping fissure had opened across the mound's center, wide enough to swallow a cart, and from it pulsed a strange silver light. Not blinding, but not natural either. It didn't shine. It shimmered, like liquid memory. The villagers had gathered in a wide circle around it. No one dared approach. Children clung to their mothers. Dogs wouldn't stop howling. An old priest stood muttering scripture, but even his voice wavered with every syllable. As Aurelius stepped forward, the crowd parted without a word. He felt it before he saw it. The hum. The same deep rhythm that the stone had carried now echoed from the earth itself. He knelt at the edge of the crack and peered down. What he saw made his breath catch. There were carvings down there, etched into the rock, moving, realigning like clockwork gears. Symbols older than his lineage, yet somehow familiar. In the center, a shape, the broken circle, glowing, beckoning. Serana appeared beside him. "This isn't just magic," she whispered. "It's a door." Aurelius stood. "No," he said. "It's a reckoning." That night, they made camp near the mounds. No one slept. The light refused to dim. The hum refused to fade. And sometime after midnight, a voice called out, not loud, not terrifying, just impossible. It was Jaren, the boy, from the city. He walked barefoot across the grass as though drawn by a dream, eyes open but unseeing. He stopped at the fissure and stared down into it. "Jaren!" Aurelius ran to him. "What are you doing here?" The boy blinked slowly. "It wants to come back," he said, "the part that was lost." Before anyone could respond, the stone in Aurelius's pocket burst with light that, lifting from his cloak and hovering midair, it spun, faster and faster, until a beam of light shot from its center, piercing the heart of the barrow. Then silence. The light vanished, the stone dropped, and the boy collapsed. Aurelius caught him, cradled him close. "Jaren, are you with me?" The boy opened his eyes, tears streaking down his cheeks. "I remember now," he whispered. "I was there before the stars." Aurelius didn't speak. He couldn't. His heart thundered. His hands shook. This wasn't rebellion. This wasn't politics. This was something that had been waiting far longer than any throne. When morning came, the barrow was closed, sealed as though it had never split, but the earth was not silent. It thrummed, softly, steadily, and Aurelius knew something had been let loose. Or, perhaps, welcomed home. On the ride back, Serana finally broke the silence. "Do you believe him?" she asked. The king looked toward the horizon. "I don't have the luxury not to." And indeed, when they returned to the capital, strange things were already happening. Water in the royal wells no longer reflected faces. The wind spoke in perfect tones when it passed the eastern gates. Dreams were shared, and above the citadel, a new star had appeared, one no astronomer could name. Aurelius stood before the people that night, addressing them not as a ruler, but as a witness. "We have opened something," he said, "and we cannot close it." He held up the obsidian stone. It was cracked now, no longer warm, its purpose perhaps fulfilled. I cannot promise safety, I cannot promise answers, but I can promise that we will face whatever comes together." And the people didn't cheer. They nodded, because they too had seen the change in the air, the cracks in the world's skin. And while fear still lingered, it no longer ruled. The king had changed, the kingdom had changed, and beneath it all, the earth remembered. The signs came slowly at first, subtle ripples in the pattern of ordinary life. A harvest moon that refused to set for 3 nights, wells that ran full despite drought, children whispering truths they should not know. And then, on the 15th night since the barrow sealed itself shut, the rivers began to flow backward. At first, the people of Thornvale believed it was a trick of the eye, a quirk of the season. But when fishermen returned with empty nets and boats drifting against the current without wind, worry took root. When the capital's fountains began spilling upwards instead of down, panic followed. King Aurelius Thorn, once a symbol of hard-won peace and rebirth, now stood on the edge of something entirely different, a kingdom shifting not under the weight of rebellion, but under the influence of something unseen and ancient. And he feared, for the first time in many years, that he could not lead his people through what was coming. Not with law, not with steel. He summoned Serana, along with every scholar, mystic, and keeper of forgotten books within 100 leagues. They gathered in the old chamber beneath the citadel, a vault built not for strategy, but for remembrance. Dust rose as tomes were laid open, revealing symbols that echoed the ones Aurelius had seen carved into the barrow walls. One page, torn and brittle, described the phenomenon now unraveling before their eyes. It spoke of a mirror season, a time when the veil between realms grew thin, when nature reversed itself and time flowed like smoke. A season that came once every 1,000 years and only after the circle had been broken. Aurelius pressed his fingers to the bridge of his nose, the obsidian stone still cracked in his pocket like a heart no longer beating. "So we did this," he murmured. "No," said Serana, firm. "This was already coming, we just uncovered it." But the comfort of that idea vanished when the dreams began. It started among the children. Nightmares, vivid and identical, spread like fever. They all described the same place. A silver tree growing upside down in a black sky. A river of fire flowing backward, a name they could not speak, only feel. Then the adults started dreaming too. Aurelius was no exception. His first dream came with frost. Though the season was warm, his chambers turned cold enough to see his breath. In the dream, he stood in the center of the ruined barrow. But it wasn't ruined anymore. It was whole, pristine, glowing. Voices swirled around him, not in anger, but in sorrow. And from the earth, a hand reached upward, not to strike, but to touch. When he awoke, he was crying. The council urged a return to control, marshal the guards, reinforce borders, restrict travel until answers could be found. But Aurelius refused. "This isn't a rebellion," he said. "It's a memory unfolding, and we're inside it." On the 20th day, the city bells rang of their own accord. Each tower struck 13 times. No one had touched the ropes. That night, the stars rearranged, not metaphorically, visibly. Constellations twisted into new patterns, old stories overwritten in the sky. The royal astronomers, once the most pragmatic minds in the kingdom, locked their observatory and began fasting. They claimed the sky had started speaking to them, in numbers, in echoes. Aurelius rode to them himself. He found Elder Quen, the lead astronomer, seated in the center of a circle of chalk, his eyes blank with awe. "It's not a message," the elder said without turning. "It's a map. The stars are guiding us to something, or warning us away." "Which is it?" Aurelius asked. "I don't know yet," Quen replied, "but I believe the world is trying to remember something it was forced to forget." The king stayed silent a long moment. Then he said, "And what happens if the world succeeds?" Elder Quen looked at him then, and the answer was barely more than a whisper. "Then the sky will crack." 2 nights later, it did. A low roar rolled over the capital like thunder under stone. The clouds above twisted inward, not with storm, but with light, cold, colorless light that poured downward in ribbons. And in that glow, everyone in Thornvale saw it at once, the silver tree from the dreams. But this was no vision. It floated above the citadel, roots dangling like veins, its branches shifting with impossible geometry. No one could look at it directly for long. It bent the eye, the mind, but none dared flee. It was not hostile. It simply was. Aurelius stood beneath it, the crowd gathering silently behind him. The air was still, waiting. I don't know what this means, he said aloud. I don't know why it chose us, but I know one thing, we will not turn away. As if in response, the tree shuddered and a single silver leaf broke free, drifting gently into Aurelius's outstretched hand. It was warm, alive. At that moment, everyone in the square heard a single word, not with their ears, but in their bones. Remember. It passed through them like wind through wheat, leaving nothing untouched. The next morning, the tree was gone, but everything had changed. The rivers flowed forward once more, the wells reflected, the stars returned to their old positions, but the people had begun to see things. Shadows that didn't match their owners, voices in quiet corners, the feeling of something watching, not malevolent but ancient, and they remembered, not just this life, but lives before. Moments they couldn't have lived, names they had never spoken aloud, emotions that didn't belong to them yet fit perfectly. Aurelius convened his advisors once more. We are not just rebuilding a kingdom, he told them. We are standing in the ruins of many, and something older than us wants us to know it. Sirana looked pale. Do we resist it? He shook his head. No, we record it. We learn from it. We do what our ancestors never could. Listen. And so the libraries opened. The old vaults were unsealed. The songs once banned for heresy were sung again. Aurelius walked the streets, not as a king, but as a scribe, asking people what they dreamed, what they saw, what they remembered. And slowly a pattern began to emerge. A name, not spoken, but always felt, like a pressure in the chest. It was coming, not war, not disaster, but a visitor from beneath. And the silver tree had only been the first sign. The kingdom of Thorn was not alone anymore. It never had been. The visitor came with the rain. Not a storm, no thunder, no flash of lightning, just rain, soft and endless, falling straight down like threads from the heavens. It didn't soak or chill. It simply existed. Every drop shimmered like light bent into liquid, and it didn't dry. It clung to skin, to rooftops, to memory. For 3 days, it fell. And on the 4th, the whispering began. It started in the Eastern District, people hearing voices not in their ears, but in the space between thoughts. Not language exactly, more like meaning, like an emotion with syllables. Some wept. Others wandered into the streets, dazed, eyes glazed in wonder or fear. King Aurelius Thorn stood in the center of the royal courtyard when the message arrived. The boy, Jaren, the same child who had once seen the spiral beneath the barrow, walked barefoot through the gates, rain clinging to him like a second skin. His eyes glowed faintly, not with fire or magic, but with memory. He looked up at Aurelius and said simply, "It's here." No one asked who or what. They already knew. Not a creature, not a god, not a demon clawing out from the depths of forgotten stone. It was presence, a consciousness that had watched, waited, buried beneath centuries of silence. The silver tree had been its herald, the dreams its messenger, the reversed rivers, the stilled stars, side effects of awakening. Sirana stood beside the king, hand on her blade, though she knew no blade would help now. "What does it want?" she asked. Aurelius didn't answer, not immediately, because deep within he felt it too, something brushing against his soul like a hand skimming water, curious, familiar. The answer came not in words, but in vision. His knees buckled. Darkness fell, but not the kind that steals sight. This darkness was full of form, vast structures of stone and bone, spirals carved into the void, voices that sang without mouths. Aurelius stood in a hall beneath the earth, ancient beyond time, lined with statues, each one of him. But not him. Some wore crowns, others bore wounds, one wept blood, one smiled with hollow eyes, and at the center, a throne of living roots, pulsing with silver light. A figure sat upon it, not monstrous, not divine, just real. Its face was ever shifting, male, female, young, old, even faceless at times, but its gaze never wavered. "You have remembered," it said, though its mouth never moved. "I don't understand," Aurelius replied, his voice echoing inside his own head. "You will." And just like that, he was back, in the courtyard. Rain still falling, Jaren still watching. Sirana caught him before he collapsed. Later that night, as the fire crackled in the grand chamber, Aurelius relayed what he'd seen to the Circle of Nine. "This presence, this intelligence," he said, "it isn't invading us, it's waking us up, showing us what we forgot we were part of." One of the councilmen, a proud skeptic named Lord Marek, scoffed. "Dreams, visions, talking children. Your Majesty, this is madness." "Is it madness?" Sirana snapped. "If the entire kingdom is dreaming the same dream?" Marek bit back his retort. Aurelius leaned forward. It showed me something. A cycle. I've lived before, others like me, other kings, other paths, always the same ending, silence, forgetting. But why? Asked Elder Quen, the astronomer. Why would such a thing repeat? Aurelius stared into the hearth. Because every time it speaks to us, we choose fear. The silence that followed was not disbelief. It was realization. They had all felt it, in fragments, in flashes. The visitor wasn't a threat. It was a mirror. A week later, the stars aligned in a way not seen in over a millennium. 12 in a perfect ring, one in the center. The 13th light, they called it, though no name truly fit. In its glow, the city changed again. Stone whispered. Water sang, and those sensitive to the shift began to speak in voices not their own. Prophets, or echoes. One old woman wrote a book overnight in a tongue lost to history. A boy in the harbor town sculpted a model of the silver tree from driftwood and teeth. A mute girl whispered the name Kair Elon in her sleep, a name no historian could place, yet hundreds claimed to recognize. The visitor was not making contact. It was reuniting. Aurelius, ever the student of silence, began writing down everything, every whisper, every dream, every symbol that repeated. He turned the palace library into a hall of remembrance, scrolls stacked alongside modern records, drawings beside laws. He drew the throne he had seen, and when Jaren saw it, he nodded. I've sat there too, the boy said. The words were simple, the implication immense. If this being, this presence, was not alien but ancestral, then perhaps the kingdom of Thorn was not built on soil alone, but on memory, looping, returning, nudging history toward a forgotten purpose. And if that were true, what was the next step? On the 10th night of the 13th light, the visitor finally spoke to all, not through flame, not through storm, through a dream shared by every man, woman, and child in the kingdom. They stood on the edge of vast plains, stars above and below, and the voice came, gentle and vast. You have done this before, and then, this time, do not fear the gate. When they awoke, the sky had changed. Above the citadel, the stars formed a spiral, perfect and glowing. Aurelius gathered his council. The gate is not here, he said. It's beneath us. The barrows, the temple, the fissure that once opened, all signs, all pieces. They rode the next day, not as kings or knights or scribes, but as seekers. And when they reached the barrows, it was open again. No light, no hum. Just stairs, descending into the deep. Aurelius turned to his people. We remember now, he said, and then he stepped into the dark. Not with fear, but with hope. The stairwells stretched into the earth like a vein, spiraling, uneven, alive with silence. Not the absence of sound, but the kind of silence that listens back. King Aurelius Thorn led the way, his boots echoing faintly against stone carved not by tools, but by time. Behind him came Serana, Jaren, and a select group of those brave or foolish enough to descend into legend. Torchlight flickered across walls etched with markings, some ancient, others recent, as if the stone itself had been updating its story. Spirals, eyes, trees with roots above their branches. Every so often they passed openings along the sides of the tunnel, alcoves filled with bones arranged in careful, unsettling patterns. No one spoke. Even Serana, who rarely allowed fear, kept a hand on her blade, though it would be useless here. Down they went, deeper than any tomb, farther than any mine. The air grew cooler, then warmer, then oddly still, as if it were considering them. Jaren walked with a kind of peace, his small hand trailing against the wall, reading it like scripture. How far does it go? One of the guards whispered. Aurelius didn't answer, because it wasn't a question of distance anymore. It was a question of when. Finally, the staircase opened into a vast chamber, a space too large, too precise to be natural. A dome with no ceiling, no sky, only darkness that pulsed like breath. In the center stood an altar, not of gold or silver, but of obsidian and bone. On it rested a sphere, hovering slightly, turning slowly, emitting no light yet visible in perfect clarity. Aurelius stepped forward, drawn not by will but by recognition. This is it, Jaren said quietly. This is the gate. The king turned to the others. I've seen this before. In the vision? Serana asked. No, he said, in the dream we all shared. The voice, soft as snow, returned. You are ready. No one else seemed to hear it, but Aurelius felt it inside every joint, every scar, every piece of him that had been broken and reformed over the years. He reached out and touched the sphere. It did not resist. It accepted. And then reality bent. The chamber didn't shake. It unfolded. Walls uncurled like scrolls, revealing layers of time hidden beneath stone. Images flickered in the air, memories not his own, yet intimately familiar. He saw a city of light before fire, a council of kings, himself among them, again and again, making the same decision, each time ending the same way: silence, forgetting, rebuilding. He saw the first spiral drawn in the dirt by a child with glowing eyes. He saw the sky crack open, and he saw the mistake. At the heart of the dream, at the moment of communion, one choice always broke the cycle. One betrayal, one fear. Aurelius cried out, staggering back. "What did you see?" Serana demanded, catching him. "The truth?" He gasped. "We sealed it away, the memory, the visitor, because we were afraid of what it would make us." "And what's that?" Jaren asked, stepping forward. "More," Aurelius whispered. "More than kings, more than mortals, but less than gods." He turned back to the altar. "We broke the circle every time because the cost of knowing was too high." Serana stared. "And now?" Aurelius looked at her, and in that moment, the weight of every past life settled into his gaze. "Now we don't run." He pressed both hands to the sphere. It shattered without sound, without violence. And the gate opened. Not a door, not a portal, a shift. The chamber became a spiral, infinite and contained. The group was no longer in the earth, yet still underground. Above them, stars blinked in patterns impossible from any sky. Around them, memories drifted, of battles not yet fought, of lives not yet lived. And then, in the center, it emerged. The visitor, not creature, not ghost. Formless and formed, like a mirror given breath. "You've come far," it said. Aurelius stepped forward. "You've been waiting." "Yes," it said, "because you are the remembering kind, the breaking kind, the mending kind. What do you want from us? To finish what we began." The visitor extended an arm, a branch, a wave, a line of silver thought, and touched the king's chest. "You were not made to rule over. You were made to hold together, to guide the remembering." "I don't understand," Aurelius admitted. "You will." And with that, the chamber returned, stone, cold, earthbound. But everything had changed. The group stood where the altar once was, and in its place lay a single spiral carved into the floor, fresh, glowing. Jaren looked up. "It's begun," Aurelius nodded. "The remembering." When they returned to Thornvale, the people felt it immediately. Not terror, not confusion, a rightness. The rains had stopped. The fountains flowed with golden light at dawn. Children sang in tongues not taught. Old wounds faded, not vanished, but softened. And across the kingdom, those who had dreamed now began to remember, not as fantasy, but as heritage. They had been part of something once, something vast and connected, a pattern not erased, only hidden, and now the gate had made them whole. Aurelius stood on the palace balcony that night, gazing at the stars, new ones now, bright and singing. Serena joined him. "So, what now?" she asked. He turned to her with a tired smile. "Now we stop forgetting." Below them, the city began to glow, not with fire, but with memory. And the spiral turned once more. The spiral was no longer a symbol. It was alive, etched not only into the stone beneath Thornvale, but into the hearts of its people. It appeared in the patterns of clouds, in the flight paths of birds, in the way rivers split and joined again. Children drew it instinctively, without understanding why. Elders spoke of dreams that were not theirs, but somehow belonged to them anyway. And every night, above the palace, the stars curved gently into that same eternal coil. King Aurelius Thorn had not slept in 3 nights, not out of fear, but because sleep had become unnecessary. Since opening the gate, something within him had changed. He no longer aged the same way. His thoughts stretched further, no longer bound by the moment. He could see connections forming before they happened. Not visions, but a deeper kind of pattern recognition, like hearing music before the first note is played. But even as the kingdom flourished, a quiet tension grew, because when the spiral awakens, so does its shadow. The first sign came from the northern cliffs, where the sea turned black for 3 days and frothed with voices. No boats returned. The second came from the whispering woods, where hunters vanished and trees began growing in perfect circles. And the third, most troubling of all, came from the silent citadel. A relic from the pre-Empire days, the silent citadel had stood untouched for over 1,000 years, its gates sealed by time and superstition. But now those gates were open, wide, welcoming, and from within something had begun to speak. At first it was static, crackles of energy that disrupted compasses and broke mirrors across the region. But then came the whispers, familiar yet wrong. People began hearing their own voices echoing from distant places, saying things they had never said. Serana brought the report to Aurelius herself. "They're calling it the Echo Plague," she said, setting the scroll down hard. "People repeating memories they never lived, languages they never learned, thoughts that aren't their own." "Are they dangerous?" the king asked. "Not yet," she said, "but they're gathering, without knowing why." Jaren, now older than his years, sat near the window, his eyes distant. "It's the countercurrent," he said softly. "The spiral pulls us toward memory, but something else pulls us toward forgetting. This plague is a symptom of resistance." "From who?" Serana asked. "Not who," Jaren replied. "What?" Aurelius stood. "Then we ride to the citadel." The journey took 2 days. The land around the silent citadel had already begun to twist. Animals fled the area, birds avoided the skies, and the wind refused to blow there. When they arrived, the ancient tower stood like a wound in the earth, tall, black, humming with a frequency that made teeth ache. The gates, once rusted shut, now hung open as if inviting them in. Inside, the air was thick, not with dust, but with pressure. Every step felt watched. The spiral was absent here, no carvings, no symbols, just angular lines, sharp, deliberate, jagged like a broken thought. The group moved slowly through the halls, weapons drawn but useless. Then they heard it. Not a growl, not a scream, a chorus. Hundreds of voices, all speaking at once, but each in perfect mimicry of someone they loved. Mother, brother, lover, child. Aurelius froze when he heard his father's voice, long dead. "You always were too curious," it said, softly mocking. "That's how we broke the world the first time." The visitor had warned them. Remember, it had said. But they had remembered too well. At the heart of the citadel, they found the source, a mirror, cracked yet endless. It didn't reflect their faces. It reflected their fears. Serana saw herself burning the palace. Jaren saw himself walking alone with no stars above. Aurelius saw himself on the spiral throne, crowned, alone, eyes blank. He stepped forward. The mirror pulsed. "Turn away," it whispered. "Forget." But Aurelius had walked too far to retreat now. He reached into his cloak and withdrew the last shard of the obsidian stone, the one that had cracked in the barrow. It still hummed faintly with the spiral song. He pressed it against the mirror. The citadel screamed, not in sound, but in memory. The walls shook with forgotten names. The floor cracked with suppressed regrets, and the mirror shattered, not into glass, into light. And from that light emerged a figure. Not the visitor, not the king, something older, a being of jagged form, its face a rotating wheel of eyes and mouths, its limbs made of symbols that refused to hold still. "I am the unwritten," it said. "I am silence made flesh." Aurelius stood firm. "You are the reason we forgot." The unwritten hissed. "And for good reason. Memory is suffering. To know is to grieve. To forget is to die," Aurelius countered, again and again. The chamber darkened, reality twisting. "You are a king of dust," it spat, "of cycles and corpses. You remember, but you cannot change." And in that moment, Aurelius understood. The spiral was not just about memory, it was about choice, and now he chose. "I am not alone," he said. The shard flared. Behind him, Serana drew her sword, not as a weapon, but as a symbol. Jaren raised his handmade palm glowing with a light older than stars, and the spiral appeared, on the floor, on the walls, in the very structure of the citadel. It reasserted itself, pushing back the jagged chaos, forcing the unwritten to stagger. "This place is not yours," Aurelius said. It never was. And the spiral turned, a slow, majestic spin. The unwritten shrieked, its form dissolving, its echoes retreating, and with a final surge of light, it vanished. Silence returned. But now it was gentle, earned. The citadel stood still, empty, neutral. Aurelius turned to his companions. "The balance has tipped," he said. "The remembering will no longer be one-sided." "What now?" Jaren asked. "Now," the king said with a tired smile, "we prepare, because the spiral never ends, it only deepens." And beyond the citadel, under a star-filled sky, the spiral continued to sing. The wind had returned to Thornvale, but it was not the same breeze that once carried harvest scents and morning frost. This wind was older, heavier. It carried the scent of memory, thick with echoes of voices no longer living and dreams still waiting to unfold. After the confrontation with the unwritten, everything had quieted, but not with peace. It was the kind of silence that follows a bell, still vibrating in the bones long after the sound has gone. King Aurelius Thorn rode alone through the northern fields where once his armies trained and his banners flew. The grass grew taller now, as if trying to forget the blood that had once soaked its roots. The spiral had spread here too, not in carvings or stonework, but in the natural rhythm of things. Crops bloomed in coils, birds circled in spiraled formations. Even the rivers, once straight and stubborn, began to bend ever so slightly. The people had changed as well. Where once they bowed in awe or reverence, now they looked Aurelius in the eyes, not as subjects, as witnesses, as fellow keepers of the remembering. They no longer asked him for orders, they asked him for understanding. What comes next? What lies beneath? Who are we now that the spiral spins freely? He had no answers, but the questions themselves were a kind of progress. Back in the capital, the spiral library had become a living structure. Its books rearranged themselves. Doors opened for some, remained closed for others. Children wandered in and returned days later with ink-stained hands and stories far too old for their age. The librarians didn't stop them. They couldn't. The spiral taught who it would, when it would. And then came the letter. Not delivered by hand or horse, but found. Folded neatly on Aurelius's pillow, though none had entered his chambers. The paper was warm to the touch, the ink shimmered like dusk. You are not the only one who remembers. Others have awakened. They are coming. It wasn't signed, but Aurelius didn't need a name. He summoned the circle of 9, though only 7 remained after the echo plague scattered the others. Around the obsidian table, he laid out the letter and waited. "They're moving," said Sirana, scanning the words with narrowed eyes. "Whoever they are." Jaren, now taller and stranger by the day, nodded slowly. "We're not the only kingdom the spiral has touched." Lord Marek, ever the realist, frowned. "You mean to say there are more of these awakenings?" Aurelius answered without looking up. "No, I mean to say there always have been. We just never made it far enough to see them before." The realization settled like dust. Across oceans and over mountains, other lands, other thrones were stirring. Some would embrace the memory. Others would resist. And that resistance had begun to organize. They called themselves the Order of the Unspooled. Their doctrine was simple: peace lies in forgetting. Their methods far from simple. Saboteurs began to appear. Structures crumbled mysteriously. Spiral symbols were defaced, books burned, dreamers arrested. In towns to the east, children who spoke in ancient tongues were taken from their families for reconditioning. By the time Aurelius's scouts reached them, the towns were empty, houses intact, hearths still warm. But no people. Gone. Unwritten. One morning, as the spiral sun broke through the stained glass windows of the high temple, a priest was found hanging upside down above the altar, his body twisted into a spiral, grotesque, deliberate. On his chest, carved deeply, "Let the coil break." It was no longer a question of remembering, it was war. But not of steel and arrow, of story, of truth, of the right to remember or the power to erase. Aurelius stood before the people that evening, lighting beneath the glowing spiral tree, now fully rooted in the palace garden. Its silver leaves hummed softly like lullabies. "I will not command you," he said. "Not now. Not ever again. What we face is a choice. Do we open ourselves to the weight of what came before, or do we blindfold the future with the comfort of forgetting?" No one spoke. Not because they feared him, because they knew the answer. That night, every bell in Thornvale rang 13 times. Not for death, not for birth, for remembrance. They began preparations. Not for conquest, for preservation. The scribes wrote faster than ink could dry. Elders told stories never previously allowed to leave their minds. Children were trained, not in war but in listening, to stone, to silence, to dreams. And Aurelius, he dreamed again, but this time it was not a message, it was a meeting. He stood on a bridge of stars, suspended between 2 spirals, one of light, one of shadow. Opposite him stood a queen, tall, then crowned in midnight, eyes like broken mirrors. "I am Alaris, keeper of the veil," she said, "and your remembering has broken our silence." "Then we have much to discuss," he replied. She studied him. "You mistake this for diplomacy," he frowned. "Then what is it?" Warning. Behind her an army marched, shrouded, infinite, silent. "We remember too," she said, "but we chose differently." When he awoke, the stars above Thornvale had rearranged again, a perfect line. The spiral had paused, like as if holding its breath. The next day, scouts confirmed the impossible. Ships, hundreds of them, had appeared on the eastern coast. Their sails were black. Their hulls bore no flag, but every one of them was carved with the same emblem, a spiral snapped in two, and thus the next chapter began. not with a scream, but with a whisper. Let the stories fight. Aurelius closed his eyes and felt the spiral turning inside him. Faster now. Urgent. Not all remembering leads to peace, but it always leads to truth. The village was still wrapped in night, but not the kind of night that grips you with fear. No, this was a loose night, frayed at the seams, like a cloak worn too many times and slipping off without protest. The stars were beginning to retreat, not quickly, but gracefully, like old actors exiting the stage individually. Outside, the wind made its return. Not strong, just enough to rattle the shutters and remind the sleeping world that something was coming. Inside a modest stone cottage at the edge of Thornvale's northernmost province, an old woman stirred from a dream. Her name was Narelle, and her eyes, clouded with age but sharp with knowing, blinked slowly in the darkness. She did not light a lamp. She did not call out to her sleeping cat or fumble for warmth. Instead, she placed both hands flat against the wooden floor and whispered, "I remember." From the edge of the realm to the center of the spiral, that same phrase echoed. Men in towers muttered it in their sleep. Children carved it into snowbanks without knowing why. And high above them all, in the observatory-turned-sanctum atop the palace spire, King Aurelius Thorn stood with arms crossed, watching the eastern horizon. They had landed. The fleet with the broken spiral had made camp across the sea cliffs. Their presence was silent but deafening. No horns, no torches, just rows upon rows of dark sails and strangers with eyes like smoke. Aurelius could feel it already, the hum in the ground, the pressure in the air. These were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They would not burn crops or steal gold. They had come for something far older, far more dangerous. They had come for the story. In the grand hall, the Circle of Nine, now reforged as the Circle of Witnesses, assembled for what could very well be their final gathering. Jaren stood at the head of the table, no longer the boy prophet, but something else entirely. His voice had deepened, but his words still cut like truth. "They call themselves the Severed Line," he said, "a faction of the Order of the Unspooled, but not just rebels. They are remnants from another cycle, from a spiral that ended badly." Serana leaned in. "Ended? They broke it," Jaren said. "They chose not to remember, and in doing so, they unraveled themselves, lost their past, their future, their place in the turning." Aurelius looked down at the carved spiral in the center of the table. "Then why are they here?" "To stop us from finishing what they couldn't," Jaren replied. "Because if we reach the center, they disappear." That night, the king walked alone beneath the silver tree. The leaves shimmered with unseen wind, and the roots pulsed like veins beneath the soil. He placed a hand on the trunk and whispered, "What am I supposed to do?" And for the first time, the tree answered, not in voice, but in memory. He saw himself, not just in this life, but dozens of others. A warrior, a healer, a farmer, a father, a son. Each life folded into the next, all walking the same spiral, all asking the same question. At the center of it all stood a door, small, plain, wooden, but locked. He knew then that the Severed Line had come to burn that door before anyone could open it. At dawn, Aurelius called the people of Thornvale together. Not soldiers, not priests, storytellers. They gathered in circles, young and old, noble and peasant. They didn't speak of battle, they spoke of beginnings, of the first time they saw the spiral, of dreams they'd once dismissed, of the names they now knew were theirs, even if they'd never heard them before. As the Severed Line advanced, Thornvale did not raise shields. It raised memory. Every wall was covered in story. Every street bore spirals painted in ash and wine. Children stood hand in hand, humming the old lullabies. Mothers recited family trees that stretched back beyond time. And in the center of it all stood Aurelius, not as king, but as remembrancer. The invading army arrived without banners. They moved like mist, dressed in colorless robes, faces veiled, blades shaped like question marks. But when they reached the edge of the city, they stopped, not out of hesitation, but out of confusion, because there was no one to fight, only voices, only memory, only truth. The Severed Line's leader stepped forward. Her name was Elaris, though she had once worn a different name. Aurelius recognized her immediately, from the dream, from the Bridge of Stars. "You opened the door," she said flatly. "No," he replied. "I became it." Elaris raised a hand, and the mist around her soldiers thickened. "You know what happens if you go further?" "Yes," Aurelius said. "We stop being what we were." And become what? She demanded. He smiled sadly. Whole. The battle never came, because what happened next could never be called war. It was resonance. The spiral in the earth began to glow, low. Light poured from the stones, not upward, but inward, pulling every memory, every echo, every untold tale into alignment. The severed lines screamed, not in pain, but in refusal. Their forms began to flicker, not die, but unravel, as if the story they told themselves no longer held weight. Alaris tried to retreat, but there was no retreating from truth. The light found her, and for the first time in many lifetimes, she remembered. She dropped her blade, the mist dissipated, and the severed line dissolved. Not into dust, but into names. Some stayed, some vanished, but none remained lost. That night, Thornavale did not sleep. It didn't need to. The spiral had turned fully, and at its center stood not a throne, not a king, but a story that remembered itself. When dawn finally came, it didn't come gently. It broke, hard and sudden, spilling across Thornavale like a tide that had been held back for centuries. Light cascaded through every crack, every window, every leaf of the spiral tree, until it glowed like a sun rooted in the earth. But it wasn't the sky's brilliance that woke the people. It was the quiet. Aurelius Thorn stood at the highest balcony of the palace, his eyes fixed on a world that had just rewritten itself. Below him, the streets were still. Not lifeless, just resting, as if the entire kingdom had taken one long breath in and was waiting to exhale. And then it did. Not with sound, but with motion. Farmers opened their doors and found their tools reshaped, more efficient, yet older somehow. Librarians discovered books that had not existed the night before, bound in languages they had only spoken in dreams. Children with spiral birthmarks on their palms awoke with songs on their lips, and the sick no longer needed healing, for their bodies had realigned with the rhythm of the remembering. The spiral had touched everything, even time. Serana stood beside him, silent. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she had never seen peace arrive so loudly. "It's not over," Aurelius said. "No," she agreed, "but it's changed." In the catacombs below the palace, Jaren traced a newly formed path that hadn't been there yesterday. It curved inward, downward, spiraling into a chamber lit by its own walls. Every surface pulsed softly, as if breathing. And in the center, a stone pedestal now held what appeared to be a scroll, sealed, glowing, waiting. He didn't open it, not yet, because before one opens the next chapter, one must honor the one just finished. So a gathering was called. Not a coronation, not a feast, something else. A remembering. Thousands gathered in the grand spiral garden, a space that hadn't existed a week ago but now felt older than the mountain it rested upon. People shared stories, not just of what had happened, but of what they remembered, from other lives, other loops, names lost, loves found, mistakes forgiven, echoes reclaimed. One by one, they stepped forward. A baker told of her childhood in a desert city she had never seen. A warrior wept for a brother who had died centuries ago. His name now returned to her. A blind man described stars that no chart had ever recorded. And then it was Aurelius's turn. He walked to the center of the circle, not as king, but as the first among equals. "I have ruled," he began, "and I have failed. I have fought and fled. I have broken the world and tried to heal it. And for all these lives, I asked a single question. What does it mean to lead?" He paused, letting the question settle. "I thought it meant strength, then wisdom, then sacrifice. But I was wrong. To lead is not to decide. It is to remember, together." He looked at the gathered crowd, the children drawing spirals in the dirt, the elders humming songs their ancestors never taught them. And now we remember. The crowd did not cheer. They bowed their heads, not in obedience, but in reverence. That night, as the first stars of the new age blinked awake, the scroll in the catacombs unfurled itself. Not with magic, with purpose. It read, "You have reached the end of the beginning. Beyond this point, the story writes back. Not all memories will be kind, but all are true. Go forward and remember who you are." And as the spiral turned once more, the kingdom of Thornavale did not rise to fight. It rose to tell its story. The night after the remembering wasn't silent. It throbbed, like the heartbeat of a kingdom on the edge of something both miraculous and menacing. The stars above Thornavale had never been brighter, but they weren't comforting anymore. They watched. They shimmered in spirals, and for the first time in recorded memory, they pulsed in response to the thoughts of those below. Aurelius stood at the foot of the spiral tree, eyes half closed, one hand resting on its luminous bark. The roots beneath him pulsed with light, warm and ancient. He wasn't praying, not exactly. He was listening. And somewhere deep in the ground, something was whispering back. Behind him, footsteps, soft, reverent. "Jaren?" Aurelius asked without turning. "Yes," the boy's voice replied, though it had grown deeper, steadier. He was no longer a child. The spiral had taken that from him, or perhaps returned him to who he truly was. Jaren held the scroll, the one that had revealed itself after the kingdom remembered. It no longer glowed. Now it breathed, slow and quiet, as though conserving energy for what came next. "It's pointing again," Jaren said, holding it out. Downward. Aurelius took it in his hands. The tug was faint but insistent. Not a command, a plea. They followed the pulse, down through the catacombs, past the chamber of the storyteller's seat, deeper, into a place no map had ever drawn. It wasn't carved stone down here. It was bone and memory. The walls shimmered with the faces of forgotten kings, unnamed midwives, musicians whose notes had been lost to time. Each face blinked when passed as if awoken by recognition. "Is this the spiral's origin?" Aurelius asked, breath fogging in the sudden cold. "No," Jaren said, eyes wide. "This is its reflection." They reached a door, not wooden, not iron, but made entirely of story, threads of light and ink woven tight. It had no handle, no key, only a question burned into its center. "What will you give to remember what was never yours?" Aurelius did not hesitate. "My name," he said. The door shivered. "My crown," he added. It opened. Inside, the air was thick, not with dust or mold, but with age. The spiral on the floor glowed a dull amber. In its center stood a woman, Alaris, but not as he remembered her in dreams. She was younger, wilder. Her robes were unfinished, her spiral broken only halfway. "You've come far, Aurelius," she said, not with menace, but mourning. "I thought you vanished," he replied. "I did," she said, walking the spiral's path slowly. "But memory is not bound by presence. I'm what's left when a story refuses to be forgotten." She reached the center of the spiral and looked up. "You've awakened it. You've pulled the kingdom into the final coil." "Then you know why I'm here." She nodded. "The Hollow," she whispered. "They have no names, no stories, no shape. They erase not because they hate memory, but because they fear it." Jaren stepped forward. "How do we stop them?" "You don't," Alaris said softly. "You survive them. You remember through them." Then she turned, and her eyes burned gold. "There is one thing left, one memory buried so deep it reshapes the spiral itself if touched. It lies beyond this chamber." "What is it?" Aurelius asked. She smiled, almost sadly. "The first forgetting." With that, the chamber cracked. Not violently. Elegantly, like an egg hatching. And beyond it lay the void. Not darkness, worse, nothingness, where stories unraveled, where meaning bled out into static. Aurelius felt his knees weaken. Jaren steadied him, though his own face had gone pale. "If we step into that," Aurelius whispered, "we might not come back." "Then don't," came another voice. Serana. She had followed them, quietly, sword at her back, spiral pendant on her chest. "Let me go," she said. "You're too known, too remembered. If the Hollow sense you, they'll collapse everything." "No," Aurelius said, voice firm. "It must be me. The spiral didn't bring me here to watch." Alaris held out her hand. "The memory waits." Aurelius stepped forward, into the void, and it was silent. Not quiet, silent. He felt his thoughts peel away, one layer at a time. His childhood, his kingship, his name. Then came the memory. It was not his, it was the world's. He saw the first people, before language, before history. He saw them touch a stone carved with spirals. And for the first time they knew they had been born, that they would die, and that between those moments they could choose. But fear crept in. One among them shattered the spiral, said, "Let us forget and be free." And so forgetting began. The Hollow were born, not from malice, but from mercy. Aurelius cried out. The memory was too vast, too heavy, but he gripped it, wrapped it around his soul, and stepped backward, back into the chamber. Back into light, he collapsed. Serana caught him, Jaren wept, and the spiral tree bloomed fire across the sky. Aurelius stood and said, "Now we know." The kingdom had remembered, but the world had not. That was next. And the Hollow? They were already here. The Hollow did not arrive with armies, no banners, no cries of war. They came like rot, slow, invisible, and devastating. At first, it was just whispers, names vanishing from tombstones, songs forgetting their final notes, fields where no memory grew, where the air felt still and dry no matter the season. Then came the towns, entire villages where no one could recall who lived there the day before. People wandered streets holding photographs they no longer recognized. Jaren saw it first. He'd been mapping the spiral's reawakened paths, trying to track the resonance each memory sparked across the land. But then, sections of the map began graying out, not from ink, but from absence. The places still existed physically, but their history didn't, as if they'd never mattered, as if they'd never happened. He brought the news to Aurelius and Serana at once. They met in the Tower of Listening, the highest point in Thornavale, where the wind itself often carried truths not yet spoken. "They've started feeding," Jaren said, laying the map on the stone table, "but not on blood or land, on meaning." Aurelius didn't speak. He just stared at the map, at the missing parts of his kingdom. Not burned, not destroyed, just erased. Serana leaned over the table, jaw set. "What do they want?" Jaren's voice was hollow. "Silence, final silence. If the spiral is a record, they are the static." For a moment, the three stood still, like statues carved by panic. Then Aurelius spoke, voice sharp. "Send the lore speakers to every remaining village, not just to teach, but to listen, to gather stories before they're gone, every tale, every rumor, every fragment." Serana added, "And the spiral children, they're not just symbols anymore. They carry the echoes. We need their memories too." That same night, the kingdom moved like a body shocked into breath. Messengers flew across the realm, carrying only one command: remember, and speak it aloud. From mountaintop shrines to oceanfront hamlets, fires were lit and stories poured forth. People gathered in circles to share what they remembered, anything and everything. The taste of their grandmother's bread, the smell of rain on childhood stones, the way their lovers had whispered their names in the dark. It worked, briefly. The hollow shrank from spoken memory. Where names were called, they recoiled. Where stories were sung, they faded, but they learned. Quickly, they began to mimic. One night, in the village of Kareth, a storyteller named Hullwyn began a tale about a boy lost in the forest. Halfway through, he paused. "Wait, this isn't how it ends," he said, but the crowd insisted it was. They nodded, smiled, repeated the false ending, and Hullwyn realized these were not his neighbors. These were hollow, wearing faces borrowed from his mind, feeding on his uncertainty. He never spoke again. When word of the mimicry reached Aurelius, his face hardened. "They're not just erasing, they're replacing." Jaren, pale and exhausted, nodded. "They've discovered the deepest truth, that people will cling to false memories if they're easier than pain." Serana slammed her fist into the table. "Then we remind them of the cost of forgetting." Aurelius turned toward the spiral tree. "No, we remind them of why we remember. We don't fight with fear, we fight with meaning." It was time for the next step. The spiral's final arc had not yet been drawn, but the brush was ready. Aurelius called for the old ritual, the one forbidden after the last spiral war. The convergence. All who carried true memory, lore speakers, spiral children, the bound, and even the broken, were summoned to the Valley of Echoes. It was a place older than the kingdom, where sound traveled farther and time folded in on itself. They arrived in waves. Some walked, some were carried, some simply appeared, drawn by memory alone. There, in the valley, a great circle was formed, each person standing arm's length from the next, facing inward. In the center, Aurelius stood, holding the original spiral stone, the first carved symbol from the dawn of remembrance. He held it high. "This is not a battle of steel," he said, his voice echoing. "It is a battle of story, of soul. The hollow do not fear blades, they fear knowing." He gestured around him. "You are not just keepers of memory, you are the memory." Then he closed his eyes and spoke a name, a single, forgotten name. And the stone pulsed. Others followed. Each person in the circle recalled something real, something personal, something painful, a loss, a truth, a joy, a failure. As they spoke, the air thickened, glowed. Threads of light leapt from their mouths to the sky, weaving into constellations that spun into spiral forms. But far off, on the horizon, a darkness stirred. The hollow had found them. They poured into the valley like ink spilled across parchment. They wore faces, carried voices, echoed memories twisted slightly wrong, but they were too late. The spiral in the sky had completed itself, and as it turned, it did not burn, it sang. A song made of every voice in the circle, a harmony of truth. The hollow shrieked, not in pain, but in confusion. They could not mimic what was sung. It was too real. too full. Some of them vanished instantly, disintegrating like smoke in sunlight. Others staggered, lost in the sea of authentic memory. And a few, a rare few, fell to their knees and wept, because even they, once, had remembered something. And in the resonance of that song, a fragment returned. One hollow raised its eyes to Aurelius and whispered, "My name was Lena." He stepped forward and held her hand. As the spiral spun above them, the sky broke open, not with destruction, but with remembering. The war had not ended, but the forgetting had, for now. The morning after the convergence was unlike any morning before it. It did not rise with golden light or soft birdsong. It came with a silence so profound it rang in the bones, the kind of silence left behind not by absence, but by understanding. The spiral that had burned across the night sky was gone, but its mark remained, not etched into stone or sky, but into the people themselves. Aurelius sat at the edge of the Valley of Echoes, his cloak dusted with dew, his hand still tingling from where he had held Lena's. The hollow woman, no, not hollow anymore, had remembered enough of who she was to weep. And in her tears, something shifted. Not just in her, but in the others. Some had followed her lead. Others had fled into the crevices of the world, retreating from the light they couldn't understand. But none attacked. It had worked. Not perfectly, but it had worked. Jaren approached quietly, as always, carrying a satchel heavy with scrolls. His eyes were tired, but his voice held a flicker of hope. "We have names," he said, "dozens of them, from those who turned back. They're writing now, trying to remember who they were." Aurelius took one of the scrolls, unrolling it slowly. It was filled with uneven handwriting. Some lines were broken, others were almost illegible, but the effort, the will to reclaim identity was there. "I never thought they'd want to remember," Aurelius murmured. "They didn't," Jaren replied, "until they heard the song." Below them, the valley stirred. People were waking slowly, some in confusion, some in awe. Serana moved among them, helping the weak stand, guiding the newly awakened to places of rest. She no longer looked like a general, more like a guardian, a keeper of the flame. As the day warmed, Aurelius stood. "Call the council," he said, "not just the nobles, everyone. Spiral children, storytellers, even the Lenaborn." "You're sure they'll come?" Jaren asked. "They've already come this far." The gathering took place on the stone platform once used for executions in the old days, a deliberate choice. Aurelius wanted them to know what once was a place of endings would now be used to begin. The people arrived slowly, warily. A few hollow-born sat at the edges, still cloaked, still uncertain. Others, those who had been living in hiding for years, stood openly for the first time. The air trembled with quiet, waiting. Aurelius stepped forward, not in armor, not with a crown, just a man. "When I first heard the spiral whisper," he began, "I thought it was a call to rule. Then I thought it was a call to fight, but it was neither." He looked at Lena, now seated near Serana, her hands folded tightly in her lap. It was a call to remember and to remind. He turned slowly, meeting as many eyes as he could. "The hollow are not gone. They never will be, not entirely, because forgetting is a part of being human. We lose names, we misplace truths, we bury pain." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "But now we know," he said. "Now we've seen what happens when forgetting is weaponized, when it becomes a void. We cannot let it grow again." He raised a hand. "That's why we will build not just walls, not just laws, but stories, a living archive, one that sings, that speaks, that walks." Serana stepped forward, unfurling a banner, the new crest of Thornvale, a spiral surrounded by stars, woven in silver and fire. "This," Aurelius said, "will be our beacon, our vow." Then he paused. "And I will not be your king." Gasps, whispers, stunned silence. "I've done what I was meant to do, and now I step back, not in shame, but in gratitude. Let the spiral guide all of us now, not through one voice, but many." The Spiral Council was born that day, not from conquest, not from inheritance, but from memory. And for the first time in its long, tangled history, Thornvale wasn't just a kingdom. It was a story that remembered itself. The hollow scattered, some retreated forever, others remained at the edges, never quite returning, never quite leaving. A few stayed close, helping record what they could remember, learning to live with ghosts instead of becoming one. The spiral tree bloomed once a year, not with fruit, but with flame. A fire that did not burn, but remembered. And beneath its boughs, children played. They told stories older than their grandparents, stories not found in books, but in breath, in laughter, in the dust between stones. And every year, on the longest night, the people gathered again. They sang, not to keep the hollow away, but to keep themselves whole. Because forgetting is easy, but memory must be chosen. And now they chose it, again and again, until the spiral turned no more. And the world, finally, remembered everything. The Spiral Council had been born in memory, but it lived in motion. Each day, its members met not in palaces, but in open-air forums beneath sky and branch, where words could rise freely and fall without echo. The people spoke, and the land listened. But peace, even one as earned and rooted as Thornavale's, is a fragile bloom. One morning, as the mist still clung to the valley floor, a rider approached from the north. He wore no armor, no sigil, only a cloak sewn with silver thread that shimmered like starlight. His horse moved with eerie silence, hooves barely brushing the earth. The gatekeepers let him pass, not because they recognized him, but because the spiral whispered they should. He dismounted in the square of remembering. His eyes were pale, not from blindness, but from having seen too much. The crowd hushed as he raised a scroll. "This," he said, "is from the Sky Library of Erelon." The name rippled like thunder across the council. Erelon, long thought a myth, a city of floating towers built upon memory and wind, said to have vanished after the Second Spiral War. No one had seen it in over a century. The rider's voice was steady. The sky remembers what the earth forgets. He unrolled the scroll. Aurelius, seated in the front row, not as king but as witness, felt his spine stiffen. The scroll held not words, but images, drawings of sigils, spirals, and something else. A pattern beneath the pattern. A counter-spiral. Serana leaned in. "What does it mean?" The rider looked directly at Aurelius. "It means the spiral isn't finished. It never was. It's still writing." A heavy silence followed, not of confusion but recognition. The spiral's awakening hadn't been the final chapter. It had been the turn of a page. The rider spoke again. "Erelon still exists, but it's fading, and with it, the sky's memory. If it disappears completely, so will everything it remembers, even what Thornavale has reclaimed." Jaren stepped forward, aged by knowledge, his fingers trembling. "Then we must reach it." The rider nodded. "You'll need a skyfarer and a storm reader and something more." He pulled from his cloak a shard of glass, smooth silver, pulsing faintly with blue light. "A memory beacon," he explained. "It can hold one memory. Only one, and it must be pure." The council erupted in questions. What kind of memory? Who chooses it? Can it be a shared one? Aurelius held up his hand. "We choose together," he said, "but the one who carries it must be willing to give it up." Jaren flinched. "You mean, forget it?" "Yes," the rider said. "Once it's sealed in the beacon, it won't be yours anymore, not even in dreams." And so began the choosing. People from all walks stepped forward, offering memories. One recalled the birth of her son, another, the final words of a dying parent. Some wept as they spoke. Some smiled, others simply stood in silence, letting the memory shine through their eyes, but none felt right, until Lena approached. The Hollowborn woman, now full of voice and name, stood before the council. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with clarity. "I remember the moment I became hollow," she said, "and I remember the moment I was forgiven. One was darkness, one was light. I offer them both." The beacon pulsed stronger. Serana whispered, "It accepts." Aurelius stepped down from the stage, took Lena's hands in his. "Are you certain?" She nodded. "They were never just mine. They belong to the spiral now." And with that, the memory was sealed. A soft light poured from her chest, winding like smoke into the shard, which glowed like a new star. She collapsed gently into Serana's arms, eyes open but distant. Her past was gone, but her purpose remained. The council prepared the journey. Skyfarers were summoned from the eastern ranges, quiet folk who walked among clouds and navigated wind like sailors at sea. The storm reader came from the Isle of Tempests, her body marked with lightning scars and eyes that flashed with prediction. Aurelius would not go, nor Serana, nor Jaren. The spiral demanded new voices now. 3 were chosen: Kale, a young spiral child whose dreams often came true; Mira, a warrior turned storyteller who once tamed a hollow with a lullaby; and Theon, a blind mapmaker who remembered paths no one else could see. They departed at dawn. The skyship was unlike anything Thornavale had known, built of memory wood and wind glass, powered not by fire, but by direction. As it rose into the mist, the beacon held firm in Xeel's hands. The air shimmered with threads of potential. The The sky welcomed them, and behind them, the spiral tree pulsed once, then once more, and the stars rearranged themselves, not into constellations, into questions. Because memory is not just what has been, it is what we dare to remember next, and the sky had not finished speaking. The skyship named Whisperleaf drifted steadily above the clouds, carried by invisible currents that moved not with the wind, but with memory. Its hull hummed with a sound that was less vibration and more intention, as if it knew where it was going long before its passengers did. Tail, Mira, and Theon stood on the deck, watching the horizon shift from sunrise gold to the soft lavender of approaching twilight. The beacon, still held tightly in Kale's hands, continued to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. But it wasn't just his anymore. It contained Lena's most sacred truth, a fragment of darkness and light bound together by sacrifice. "I can hear her," Kale whispered. Not her voice, but the echo of what she gave up. Mira nodded, arms crossed. Her eyes scanned the swirling patterns of the sky. "That's how it works. The beacon doesn't carry memory like a box holds a stone. It carries it like a song, always playing but never repeating." Theon smiled faintly. "Good, because I need a new melody to walk by." They had been flying for 2 days. No stars, no sun, only light filtered through a veil of pale blue mist that made time feel optional. The sky did not obey clocks. It moved by feeling. On the 3rd day, it changed. Mira was the first to notice it. The hum beneath her feet shifted to a stutter, then a silence. The ship began to tilt. "Brace," she called. Theon dropped to one knee, steadying himself against the edge rail, his hands splayed wide. "It's not a storm, it's a distortion." Before they could ask what that meant, the sky twisted. Not in circles, but in layers, like pages torn from a book and shuffled midair. One moment they saw mountains below, the next, ocean. Then desert, then stars, then nothing at all. Kale gripped the beacon tighter. "It's reacting," he gasped. "I think." A burst of light exploded from the front of the ship, tearing through the mist like a blade. When the brightness faded, they saw it, suspended in the air, impossibly high and impossibly old. Erelon. It was not a city built upon clouds, but within them. Towers spiraled upward like threads of glass, and walkways curved in impossible geometries. Bridges shifted mid-step. Doors opened inward and outward at once. The entire city glowed with a faint silver light, pulsing like a heartbeat. They approached slowly, the ship guided by unseen hands. As Whisperleaf docked onto a platform made of woven crystal and songlight, a figure emerged to greet them. He was neither young nor old, tall nor short. His features shimmered slightly, as though remembering themselves differently every few seconds. "I am the Archivist," he said, "keeper of what the world dares not dream." Seal stepped forward, beacon raised. "We've come to restore memory." The Archivist inclined his head. "Then you are not the first." The words chilled them. Mira asked, "Who came before us?" The Archivist gestured for them to follow. They walked through corridors made of translucent stone. Voices whispered in the walls, fragments of lullabies, confessions, promises broken and kept. The farther they went, the heavier the air became. "There were others," the Archivist said, "who came bearing memory, but they brought only triumph, glory. Half-truths, stories polished until they cut like knives. Erelon does not accept lies, even beautiful ones." He stopped before a vast chamber filled with floating glyphs, millions of them spinning slowly in spirals. "This is the Sky Ledger," he explained. "Every memory ever offered to Erelon. Some were accepted, others unraveled." Theon reached out, and a glyph hovered closer. It sang a note that made his knees buckle. "That was my mother's voice," he whispered. "Then your path here was not random," the Archivist said. "The spiral calls only those who carry echoes strong enough to be remembered." He turned to Seal. "You carry the beacon. But to release its truth, you must descend." "Descend where?" "The core of unspoken thought." A pause. "Sounds inviting," Mira muttered, but they followed. Down, past hallways that shimmered like mirrors underwater. Past doors that opened into dreams. Down until sound faded and light became feeling. They reached a platform above a chasm filled with flowing symbols like a river of language. A bridge extended, made of threads as thin as spider silk. "You must cross alone," the Archivist said to Seal. The boy turned to Mira and Theon. "If I don't come back—" "You will," Mira said, "because you're not carrying just a memory. You're carrying hope." Seal nodded and stepped onto the bridge. It did not sway. It didn't move at all, but with each step, A memory surfaced around him, visions not his own. The first hollow, the burning of Thornavale, Lena's face when she forgot her own name. He reached the center. The beacon pulsed wildly. A voice, not the archivist's, filled the air. Speak the memory. Cale closed his eyes and spoke. He described Lena's fall into darkness, her return to the light, and the cost of letting go. He spoke her name, not as a victim, but as a witness, a warrior, a woman who chose truth over comfort. When he finished, the beacon shattered, not with violence, but with grace. Its light flowed into the river of symbols, and the entire chamber shivered. Above, in the sky ledger, new spirals formed, 1, then 3, then hundreds. The city began to sing, and in the streets above, people paused, looked up, remembered. The spiral was changing, and the sky was writing again. The city of Erelon had sung, and the world had listened. Yet the melody it released was not one of triumph, but of awakening. As Cale stood at the heart of the sky ledger, the echoes of the released memory still dancing in the air around him, the chamber shifted. Not violently, but reverently, like a cathedral bowing to a truth long denied. The threads beneath his feet dissolved into mist, lifting him slowly back toward the upper tiers. As he ascended, the river of symbols below flowed faster, brighter, louder. The archivist stood waiting, hands folded, face serene but solemn. "You have given us a true memory," he said, "and now the city remembers itself." Mira and Theon rushed forward as Cale's feet touched solid ground. "Are you all right?" Mira asked, grasping his arm. Cale nodded, though his eyes were distant. "I think I saw more than I was meant to, or maybe exactly what I was meant to." Before they could ask more, the ground trembled. Not the kind of tremor that brings fear, but one that announces change. The sky ledger erupted in a pillar of light, shooting upward through the towers of Erelon into the heavens beyond. It pulsed once, then fractured into 1,000 shimmering strands. Each strand sailed outward in a different direction, streaking through the air like celestial messengers. The archivist turned to the trio. "It is done. The spiral remembers. But so does something else." Theon furrowed his brow. "Something else?" The archivist gestured upward. "There is a balance to all remembrance. For every truth reclaimed, a lie must be confronted. For every name restored, a shadow must wake." Mira drew her blade instinctively. "You're saying we've awakened something bad?" The archivist met her eyes. "Not bad. Buried." At that moment, across the skyship docks, alarms began to ring, soft, melodic tones that somehow carried dread. A second figure approached, this one not shimmering but solid, heavy, robed in obsidian with a hood that seemed to swallow light. The archivist did not flinch. "You've come." The figure nodded. The ledger stirred. The vault answered. Cale stepped forward, his voice cautious. "What's the vault?" The hooded figure spoke. "The place where Erelon stores what must not be remembered." Theon's eyes widened. "You mean forgotten things?" "Worse," the figure said. "Things too dangerous to forget and too painful to keep." Suddenly, Seal felt the air around him thicken. A pressure built behind his eyes. He saw flashes, faces without names, places with no past, a battlefield of memories fighting for breath. The spiral opened the way, the figure continued. "And now the vault is bleeding." Mira turned to the archivist. "How do we stop it?" "You don't," he said. "You listen, and you choose what must be sealed again and what must be set free." The council chamber in Erelon was unlike any space they had seen. It bent light and gravity, curving in on itself like the inside of a question. Cale, Mira, and Theon stood before a circle of shimmering seats, now filled with beings that shimmered between human and something else. Librarians of memory, guardians of the unspoken. "The vault," one of them said, "holds fragments from every age. Regrets, betrayals, forgotten gods, failed futures. They stir now, drawn to the spiral's light." A massive crystalline screen appeared in the center of the chamber. On it, an image began to form, blurry at first, then sharp. A battlefield, but not one that had happened, one that might. Thornavale, burning. Aurelius, older, standing against a tide of hollow more monstrous than human. Serana, fallen, the spiral tree uprooted. Mira stepped back. "This isn't a memory." Theon's voice cracked. "It's a warning." The archivist raised a hand. "Not a warning. A possibility. One of many. If the vault breaks, this may come to pass." Seal turned to the council. "Then tell us how to keep it sealed." A long silence followed. "By understanding it," one whispered. Another added, "By walking it." "What do you mean?" Mira asked. A door appeared, carved from petrified flame. It opened without sound. To seal the vault, you must enter it, Theon grimaced. And if we don't make it back, then Erelon forgets again, and the world loses its path. Kale stepped forward. Then we go. The vault's entrance wasn't a place. It was a descent into thought. As they crossed the threshold, the city vanished behind them. Sound faded, time slowed. They walked through a corridor that bent around their memories, each step unfolding a piece of who they were. Kale saw himself as a boy, lost in Thornavale's fields, calling for a mother who never answered. Mira saw the first hollow she ever killed, just a girl, barely older than she was. Theon walked blind through a world of scent and sound, hearing his father's voice for the last time before the mines collapsed. They did not speak. They emerged into a chamber that defied comprehension. It was both vast and narrow, filled with floating shards of broken memory. Each shard whispered. "This is what was buried," said a voice that came from nowhere and everywhere. "Choose what must rise, choose what must sleep." And so they did. One by one, they reached out, touching the fragments that called to them. Some dissolved, others pulsed, locked back into silence, but one shard burned bright and refused to fade. It was Aurelius, alone, crying in a ruined hall holding a crown made of bone. Seal touched it, and the vault screamed. The scream from the vault wasn't sound, it was sensation, sharp and sudden like ice water pouring through veins. Kale staggered back, clutching his temples, his vision swimming with flashes he couldn't understand. Not yet. The fragment he touched pulsed with a life of its own, as if it refused to be buried again. Mira rushed to his side, steadying him. "What did you see?" "Not a memory," Kale gasped. "A possibility. One that's trying to force its way into the present." Theon stared at the shard, which hovered now in the air, spinning with unnatural speed. "That crown, I've seen it before, in the legends, the Bone Crown." Mira's face hardened, the one forged in betrayal, the one worn by the last king before the hollow rose. The chamber around them trembled again. Other shards reacted, drawn to the Bone Crown's memory like iron filings to a lodestone. One by one, they lit up, burning with grief, fury, and longing. From the shadows emerged the hooded figure again, the one who had spoken of the vault. But now its form was less human, more like living dusk, its voice a blend of many. "You've awakened the Nexus memory, the fulcrum on which all other forgotten truths rest." Sale, still recovering, asked, "Why was it buried?" "Because it split the world," the figure said, "and if spoken aloud again, it could do so once more." A gust of wind, not natural, but forged from thought, swept through the chamber. The shards began to circle the trio, forming a slow vortex of recollection. Scenes played within them, armies marching under a black sun, rivers flowing backward, cities crumbling in reverse. Mira narrowed her gaze. This is no longer a walk through memory. This is a test. Theon drew his blade, then we pass it. Suddenly, the bone crown fragment erupted in white flame, and from it emerged a figure, an echo made flesh, tall, robed, crowned in bone. His eyes were empty voids, his voice a whisper heard within the mind. "I am Malric, the unspoken king." The chamber bowed beneath the weight of his presence. "You tread the path of memory," Malric said. "But memory alone is not truth. It is choice." Seal stepped forward, defiant despite the tremble in his limbs. "We've come to seal the vault, not to be ruled by it." Malric nodded once, almost with amusement. "Then you must prove your truth is stronger than mine." The walls of the chamber dissolved. The trio stood suddenly in a ghost version of Thornavale, half-ruined and ash-stained. Hollow forms rose from the streets, faceless, relentless. "This is the trial of the unburied," Malric's voice echoed. "Survive or be forgotten." They fought. Not with blades alone, but with memories. Every hollow that lunged carried a piece of lost sorrow, a forgotten brother, a failed promise, a shattered oath. And with each strike, Kale saw more of Malric's past, how he took the Bone Crown to stop a war, only to become the reason it never ended. Theon took a heavy blow to the shoulder but stood tall. He wasn't a tyrant at first, he shouted. He was trying to protect his people. And when they questioned him, Mira added, slicing through a hollow, he erased the question. Kale reached the center of the ghost city, where the Bone Crown hovered. Malric stood behind it, arms crossed. "You think sealing me again will save your world?" Malric asked. "It was my silence that kept the spiral from collapsing long ago." "No," Kale replied. "It was your silence that damned it to forget." He stepped into the circle of hollow, raised his hand and called to the vault. I offer this memory, not to bury it, but to bind it, as warning, as witness. The vault answered. The crown cracked. Light spilled from it, not burning, but healing. The hollow dissolved into mist. Malric's echo faded, not in defeat, but in surrender. Then remember me, he said softly, not as king, but as the mistake no one dared recall. With a final breath, the ghost city vanished. The chamber returned. The shards settled. The hooded figure stepped forward. You have passed. The vault may seal again, but now it sings with your memory, too. Kale, Mira, and Theon stood in silence. I think, Mira said, we've changed something. Not something, Seal replied. Everything. The chamber was quiet now, eerily so. After the storm of memory and the breaking of the bone crown, the silence that followed was not peace, but potential. The kind of hush that precedes a choice so consequential, even time hesitates. Kale stood over the place where Malric had faded, his hands still tingling with the echo of memory. The vault had accepted their offering, yes, but in doing so, it had marked them. Marked him. Did we really seal it? Theon asked, his voice barely more than a breath. Kale turned to face his friends, eyes darker than before. We did, but we left a crack. From behind them, the archivist returned, walking calmly across the chamber floor, robes trailing starlight. Some truths cannot be unlearned, and some choices once made bind more than memory. What now? Mira asked, tightening her grip on her blade. The archivist looked to the highest point of the vault's dome. A new spiral had formed there, one pulsing faintly with golden light. Now the spiral shifts, and those beyond Erelon will feel its pull. Above them, the chamber shimmered, projecting a map, not just of Thornavale, but of all the spiral kingdoms. Red pinpricks of light dotted the map, glowing brighter with each pulse. Theon stepped closer. Those places, what are they? Anchors, the archivist said, tethers where the forgotten cling tightest. If left unchecked, the hollow may rise there anew, fed not by fear, but by false memory. Mira's eyes narrowed. Then we destroy the anchors. No, Seal said firmly. We reclaim them. The archivist nodded. You've walked the vault. Now, you must walk the world. The ground beneath their feet shifted again, revealing an ascending path carved from crystal and ash. It led not up nor down, but outward, into a horizon of living memory. Seal took the first step. They emerged not into Erelon's sunlit street stack, but into a place untouched by time. The air shimmered with tension, not heat, but expectation. The spiral was awake. The world would remember. Their first destination lay across the valley of still echoes, a place where history once fractured and then fell silent. As they crossed it, ghosts of past travelers shimmered in and out of view. Failed emissaries, broken prophets, forgotten warriors. None spoke, but their presence weighed heavily. Why do they follow us? Theon asked. They don't, Mira said, watching a ghost child vanish. They're waiting to see if we end up like them. When they reached the valley's edge, a storm waited, not of weather, but of memory. A swirling torrent of sights and sounds too jumbled to place, a chorus of what-ifs and never was. Seal stepped into it first, and he saw her. Serana. Not the version he remembered, but younger, fiercer, full of fire and defiance. She stood at the heart of the storm like holding a blade of light and a scroll of prophecy. You've come far, Kale, her voice echoed, both proud and sad. But the spiral does not reward distance, only direction. He reached for her, but his hand passed through. She's not real, Theon said. She's not false either, Mira added. Serana turned to face them all. The next anchor lies beneath the city of Viralorn, a place that traded its past for power. You must descend. You must remember for them what they chose to forget. Then she faded. The storm cleared, the path forward shimmered with challenge, but also clarity. Viralorn awaited, and beneath its polished stones and gilded towers, another fracture waited. The road to Viralorn shimmered like a mirage, a sliver of memory stretched across time and terrain. As Kale, Mira, and Theon walked the glassy path that spiraled across the fractured plains, the silence between them was filled not with tension, but weight, each footstep carrying the burden of knowledge too long buried. Viralorn wasn't visible until they were nearly on top of it. The city had buried itself, literally. What once stood proud atop cliffs now lay beneath them, encased in layers of stone and secrecy. A crown turned inward, ashamed of its past. They found the entrance hidden in a monument that bore no name. As they stepped inside, it was like descending into a memory preserved in amber. The walls pulsed faintly with light, alive with whispers from lives long lost. This place, it's not dead, Mira murmured. It's dormant. Kale reached out, brushing his hand against an etched mural. The figures danced, warred, wept, and crowned themselves kings and queens. But near the end of the mural, the stone blurred, not from erosion, but from choice. They erased their own ending, he said. Viralorn chose to forget. Theon touched his shoulder. Then it's up to us to remind them. The spiral stirred. At their feet, the ground opened into a chamber of crystal and smoke. They stepped through, and the descent began, not through stairs, but through sensation. Each level they passed revealed not architecture, but memory. A woman burning her family's history to earn a seat at the council. A boy trading his true name for a new face. A priest whispering a prophecy he vowed never to write down. This is what power costs here, Mira said. Identity. They reached the base. A round chamber with no doors, no altar, only a single figure seated at its center, cloaked in veils of light and ash. I am the keeper of silence, the figure said, though no mouth moved. And you have come seeking truth. Kale stepped forward. No, we've come to give it back. The keeper tilted its head. Then speak. Kale took a breath and the chamber reacted. Shards of forgotten truths rose from the floor like glass flowers, each one pulsed with a moment, a choice, a sin. You will each offer one, the keeper said, but only one. Mira went first. She chose a memory of her first command, where she'd abandoned a village to save a battalion. The shard glowed crimson, then melted into the floor. Theon followed. He chose a vision of his father's betrayal, how the mines collapsed not from accident, but sabotage. His shard burned silver. Xeel stood last. He closed his eyes. He remembered Serana, not her death, but her choice. How she had willingly walked into the spiral to protect them all. How he had let her. I remember her sacrifice, he said, but I also remember that I chose to forget it. His shard turned gold and didn't vanish. It rose instead, merging with the air, and the entire chamber shifted. The keeper removed its veil. It was Serana. Or rather, what remained of her, a shade caught between silence and speech. You remembered, she whispered, so I could return. Seal dropped to his knees, grief and awe flooding him. Why didn't you say anything before? Because I wasn't whole, she replied. Not until you were. The chamber began to quake. The spiral within Viralorn awakened, pulsing through the walls, the stones, the sky. Outside, the city stirred. People emerged from their houses, blinking as the sky itself seemed to breathe. Statues cracked open, revealing inscriptions hidden beneath. Bells that hadn't rung in centuries began to toll. The spiral was remembering. Serana looked to Mira and Theon. You must go. This city is only the first. More anchors remain. More truths demand voice. She turned to Kale. But you must stay, for now. Viralorn needs a guardian. Someone to remind them that forgetting is never the path to peace. Kale's eyes filled with tears. Will I see you again? She smiled. You just did. Mira placed a hand on his shoulder. We'll come back for you. Theon nodded. And you better still be alive when we do. With one last look, Kale stepped back into the chamber's center as the spiral's light embraced him. Mira and Theon turned toward the next path, their steps guided now not just by duty, but by legacy. And above them, the spiral carved a new arc across the sky. Thank you for walking this far with us through the echoes of memory and the fire of forgotten truths. If you've made it to this point, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think lies ahead for Mira and Theon? Do you believe Seal made the right choice in staying behind? Leave a comment and share your reflections. I read every one. Your voice matters in this journey. If you found yourself moved, intrigued, or even a little haunted by what unfolded in Viralorn, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps bring more stories to life, stories shaped by ancient echoes, timeless lessons, and the flicker of fate. Click that bell so you never miss the next chapter. We'll return tomorrow night with another tale that just might shift your world a little. Until then, rest well, dream deeply, and remember, sometimes remembering is the most courageous thing of all. Good night, fellow traveler. We'll meet again.